with countless treasures hidden within the dungeon. Adventurers who have conquered it have gained immense wealth and the greatest fame in the world. However, not everyone is allowed to become an adventurer in this world. Only those who are chosen can take on that role. And then, a young man confidently stepped forward. He carried a large blue sack on his back and walked boldly down the road. The sack was tightly secured with a rope. Suddenly, a soldier blocked his path. The soldier, named Dona, spoke up to warn him. "Hey, ahead of you is the dungeon. Only those with the proper authorization are allowed to enter." At that moment, Dona suddenly gasped in surprise. "Huh? What's this? You are?" His eyes fell on a pendant with a circular frame on the young man's chest, designed like a small pouch. Staring at him, Dona blurted out, "A pouch? How could a mere carrier have the pouch of an adventurer?" The young man's name was Nagi. Dona noticed the emblem he wore. It was the white rank carrier badge. Letting out a sigh, he smacked his forehead. "Oh, come on." Behind him, 3 others sat around a small fire, warming themselves. One of them sneered, "A mere carrier arriving later than the adventurers? Seriously, kids these days." Dona clicked his tongue but said nothing more. Meanwhile, Nagi laughed heartily. "Sorry about that, this is my first time here." Dona turned to him with a skeptical look. "But why are you alone? Where are the other carriers? The carrier guild should have already received the 50 gold payment, right?" Nagi, unfazed, responded slowly. "Ah, well, you see." He proudly pounded his chest and introduced himself. "I'm Nagi, the carrier who costs 50 gold per day." Dona's eyes widened in shock. "A carrier? That costs 50 gold a day?" Then he shouted right in Nagi's face. "Do you take me for a fool?" Seeing Nagi's seemingly timid demeanor, Dona scolded him even more fiercely. "This is a dungeon. It takes at least 4 to 5 carriers to handle the supplies. How do you plan to manage everything by yourself?" Crossing his arms, Dona glanced at the massive pile of luggage nearby and continued. "Answer me, can you carry all our gear on your own? Not to mention the loot we'll collect inside the dungeon. Do you really think you can just waltz in and shoulder the burden of our lives?" Nagi turned his gaze toward the towering pile of supplies. Dona stood with arms akimbo, as if making a declaration. "If you understand, then go back to the carrier guild and bring more people. If not, I'll make sure that guild faces serious trouble." Nagi let out a small cough and muttered, "Wow, 4 people sure do have a lot of baggage." Hearing this, Dona smirked smugly and said, "See, I told you. You can't possibly carry all that." He closed his eyes for a moment, deep in thought. The reactions of the adventurers were understandable. After all, a single carrier costing 5 times the normal rate, when the average daily wage was just over 10 gold, was bound to raise eyebrows. Lifting a backpack onto his shoulder, he reasoned that rather than explaining himself, it was better to simply show them. With that thought, he turned his gaze toward his massive blue sack. Gripping it lightly, he lifted it with ease. All of their luggage had already been neatly packed inside his blue sack. Jeffnam and the 2 others sitting by the fire gaped in shock, their mouths hanging open. "What the?" Jeffnam muttered, staring at Nagi. "Is that some kind of magic bag?" Nagi, smiling, slung the blue sack over his back effortlessly. "I just need these things, right?" he asked. Dona and the blonde-haired soldier beside him immediately crowded around, bombarding him with questions. "What is that thing? Where did you get it? Is it heavy? Man, that looks handy. I wish I had one." Nagi scratched his head sheepishly and replied, "Sorry, but this is an exclusive item. No one else can use it." Then he asked, "So, have you decided to hire me yet?" At that moment, Jeffnam, the red-eyed adventurer standing behind them, barked, "Enough of this nonsense." He slowly stood up and approached Nagi, studying him carefully. "It's just another magic bag used by carriers," he scoffed, before finally nodding. "Fine, I'll hire you." Jeffnam, a gold-ranked swordsman and the leader of the Wolf's Crest party, suddenly clenched his fist and raised it high before resting it on his hip. With a low growl, he warned, "But you better be worth that gold. If you can't handle the work of 5 men, you'd better be ready for the consequences." Despite the threat, Nagi remained completely unfazed. He furrowed his brows slightly and closed his eyes, thinking, "So, he's the party leader? He seems strict." Jeffnam turned away and commanded the team, "Grab your gear and get ready for the expedition." Nagi smirked, his expression turning dangerously confident. "Well, that's fine with me." Unable to hold it in, he let out a carefree, hearty laugh. Following behind the 4 adventurers, He walked at ease, lost in his own thoughts. Before we conquer the dungeon, I'll make sure they're completely satisfied. The 5 of them ventured deeper into the cave. The reason I get paid more than other carriers isn't just because of my ability to carry loads. Holding up a torch, Nagi's gaze sharpened. It's because of the absolute satisfaction I bring to adventurers. With practiced precision, he guided the light, carefully illuminating the path ahead for the 4 adventurers. Dungeon explorers faced countless dangers at any moment. A trap could be sprung. A person stepped on a patch of ground, causing it to sink into a square trap. The man with the tuft of hair lost his balance and fell to the ground. Beneath his feet, countless sharp spikes emerged from the earth, a hidden ambush. Ahead, several bizarre monsters appeared, wielding axes and charging toward them. He quickly took cover behind a boulder, while 4 others stood their ground, ready for battle. Jeffnam raised his sword and shouted, "They're coming." Dona lunged forward, thrusting his spear straight into the mouth of a green-skinned monster. Another creature dashed toward Jeffnam, but he swiftly blocked its strike. Dungeon conquests were filled with endless uncertainties, leading to significant tension. Jeffnam winced in pain, gritting his teeth as he clutched half of his face. Frustrated, he scolded his teammates. "Didn't I tell you not to let your guard down? Why are you all so careless?" The 2 started arguing, blaming each other. From a distance, Nagi observed them calmly. "I got yelled at because of you," one of them accused. The other retorted, "What? You're worse than me." Nagi sighed inwardly. This is exactly why. He gently closed his eyes, feeling proud of his decision to become a porter and capitalize on this niche. As the thought crossed his mind, a mischievous smile appeared on his lips, revealing a full set of pristine white teeth. Snapping out of his thoughts, he placed a green bag on the ground and said, "All right, adventurers." The 2 who had been arguing immediately fell silent and turned to look at him. He reached into his bag and continued, "You must be starving after all that traveling. I brought some snacks." The contents of the bag left Dona and the man with the tuft of hair speechless. Their mouths hung open in shock as they exclaimed in unison, "What is this smell?" A plate of fragrant, mouthwatering meat was revealed before them. They couldn't believe their eyes. This ridiculous menu. Aside from the meat in his hands, they also saw a whole roasted chicken and several other delicious dishes. Without delay, he set up a table, complete with a tablecloth and an assortment of delicacies, delighting the 2 of them. Standing beside them, he smirked proudly. "This is the secret skill of a dungeon restaurant porter." Dona grabbed a large drumstick, holding 2 other dishes in his hands as he ate. Not only is the food special, but it's also warm, like it was freshly cooked. The man with the tuft of hair took a bite of the fresh vegetables and praised, "Oh wow, even the salad is crisp and fresh." Dona took a bite of the tough meat, his eyes welling up with tears. "I haven't eaten anything but dried meat and rock-hard bread for the past few days," he said, turning to the man beside him. He praised, "That bag of yours is amazing. Does it even have the ability to keep food fresh?" The man smiled cheerfully. Before he could respond, the blonde-haired one cut in, "Wait a minute. Could it even have a cooking function?" Feeling slightly embarrassed, he replied, "Well, something like that." Then, as if proving a point, he lowered his head, put his hand into the bag, and said, "You haven't seen everything yet." Placing his hand into the water, he pulled out a fully functional water faucet. "This is the secret skill of the porter profession," he explained. "What about the paradise of Acadiant?" someone asked. Without hesitation, he created a small bath for the scruffy bearded man, who stammered in amazement, "Are we really in a resort? It's like a hot spring in the middle of a snowy field." Closing his eyes in relaxation, the man murmured, "I feel like I'm gazing at a towering snow-capped mountain." But when he opened them again and saw the dungeon's stone ceiling, he exclaimed in surprise, "Wait, no, this isn't the scenery at all." Still, he let out a satisfied sigh and said, "But it's still incredible." Jeffnam, now visibly irritated, clenched his teeth and snapped, "So, are we on vacation now? Doing things like this in a dungeon is completely undisciplined." Yet, even as he complained, he was already enjoying the water Nagi had provided. The warmth was so comforting that he couldn't bring himself to continue scolding. Seeing this, the bearded man grinned and said, "Right? Feels great, doesn't it?" Jeffnam, with his muscular build, folded his arms leisurely, sitting in the bath with his eyes closed. He let out a soft sigh. "Well, with something like this, I have no choice but to acknowledge you." Opening his crimson eyes, he continued, "Honestly, I only wanted to test it out for a gamble. There's no way this was actually worth 50 gold. Still soaking in the bath, he muttered, I was even thinking of filing a complaint with the guild and demanding compensation. But for a porter to have magic like this, 50 gold feels like a bargain now. Nagi held out his hand with a smile and replied, isn't this exactly what dungeon conquest is about? Sitting by the fire, he continued, outsiders think dungeon conquest is difficult because of powerful monsters. But in reality, it's often the stress and harsh environment of long expeditions that lead to failure. Recalling past expeditions, he added, something as simple as an upset stomach from eating the wrong food can cause failure. Or even a lack of sleep, it happens more often than you'd think. Porters survive by supporting adventurers. Adventurers must clear dungeons to earn money, he explained. Then, raising his index finger, he told them, that's why I'm doing this. Ensuring the success of a dungeon conquest isn't much, but it makes all the difference. Hearing the man's words, the bearded warrior burst into laughter. Sitting confidently in the bath, his muscular frame relaxed, he turned to Nagi and said, saying, not much, is an understatement. Even outside, this level of treatment is rare. His eyes gleamed as if seeking confirmation. This is a feeling I've never experienced before, he added, his voice brimming with newfound energy. After being served like this, I feel completely revitalized. It's like I can take on any enemy. Nagi, hearing this, simply smiled. The bearded man then declared, there's no need to worry about the conquest anymore. With that, he stood up proudly, puffing out his chest, completely forgetting he was still in the bath. Nagi, his face turning red with embarrassment, quickly averted his gaze. Your clothes, he muttered. As expected, the dungeon conquest proceeded smoothly. Before Nagi was the sight of 4 warriors, their movements precise and unyielding as they fought against the strange creatures lurking in the dungeon. They were a well-seasoned team, and with their experience, they effortlessly cut down the monsters, while the 4 of them fought with all their strength in the chaotic battlefield. Nagi remained calm, sitting behind a rock. He adjusted his glasses, casually munching on popcorn as he watched, awaiting the results. The real problem, however, was the boss. Dungeon bosses were always random. This time, standing before them was a colossal green monster, an evolved lizard. Jeffnam gripped his sharp golden sword tightly, his crimson eyes filled with determination. Damn it, this one's going to be tough, he muttered. Without hesitation, the 4 warriors charged at the boss like a raging storm. Jeffnam, taking command, shouted, don't give it any chance to counterattack. The massive creature raised its enormous hand and swung it down toward the bearded warrior, sending him rolling to the side. But he quickly steadied himself, raised his crossbow, and fired a barrage of arrows. The bolts spread out like a spider's web, entangling the monster's arm. That was the spider web archery technique. However, the boss wasn't fazed. It retaliated, lunging forward with a powerful tail swing. The blonde-haired warrior braced himself, lifting his shield just in time to block the attack. At that moment, Jeffnam sprang into action. He raised his sword high, activating the swordsman's execution skill, and, with a decisive strike, severed the boss's tail. The monster let out a deafening roar, turning back in fury. From its gaping mouth, a surge of eerie green energy gathered before shooting out in a violent blast. Jeffnam reacted instantly, dashing forward with lightning speed. His blade cut through the air, aiming straight at the beast. His unwavering gaze reflected only one thing: victory. A thick, green liquid splattered everywhere as the boss let out another earth-shaking roar. From deep within its throat, a massive torrent of corrosive green fluid erupted. Nagi hid behind the rock, watching everything unfold. Closing his eyes, he murmured, this time, the boss is a B-rank conquest target, a beaded lizard. He quietly analyzed the situation. Based on the adventurer's current skills, the success rate is over 80%. Sounds stable enough, but I can't ignore the remaining 20%. If the adventurers fail, the porter dies. Failure is not an option. With that thought, he reached into his bag, rummaging through his supplies. Should I help them out a little? He muttered to himself. His hand delved into the bag's spatial storage, searching for something. When he finally grasped it, he sighed. Here it is. Pulling it out, he examined the mushroom-shaped item in his hand and frowned. The adventurer's attack power is sufficient. Even just creating an opportunity should be enough for victory, he thought. He hesitated for a moment, regretting having to use such an expensive smoke mushroom. But thinking about the situation, tears welled up in his eyes. With a heavy heart, he shut his eyes tightly and muttered while tossing the smoke mushroom's cord. The priority now is clearing the dungeon. There's no other choice. The question was, how to use it effectively. The boss lunged forward with terrifying force, opening its massive jaws wide as it aimed straight down at Jeffnom. Nagi observed its erratic movements. No matter how unpredictable its attacks are, he swung the cord forcefully. If I throw it at the right moment while it's attacking the adventurers. With that, he decisively hurled the smoke mushroom toward the monster. For a brief moment, the boss paused, staring at the object in front of it. Then, the mushroom exploded into a thick, choking cloud. The monster coughed violently, momentarily disoriented. Seeing this, Jeffnom shouted, "Porter!" Nagi grinned and waved a fluffy pom-pom, cheering him on. That small gesture seemed to ignite Jeffnom's fighting spirit. His eyes sharpened with resolve as he responded. "Got it." He dashed forward, striking the monster repeatedly before leaping high into the air. The boss's eyes widened in shock as Jeffnom raised his sword and delivered a devastating blow straight to its head. With a loud crash, the beaded lizard slammed into the ground, completely motionless. Its tongue lolled out, signaling its defeat. Standing atop the fallen monster, Jeffnom's eyes darkened slightly before he nodded in approval. "Good work," he said. "Let's collect our 10 loot items." The other team members cheered from below, laughing in triumph. At last, the conquest had been completed without a hitch. However, the excitement was short-lived. Nagi scratched his head as the atmosphere quickly turned bitter. Forcing an awkward smile, sweat forming on his brow, he sighed. The reason? The rewards were disappointingly low. From the defeated boss, they should have obtained at least 20 B-rank magic stones. Nagi slowly examined the loot before him. Yet, only 5 had dropped. The rest were mostly worthless junk, worse than trash. This dungeon was filled with low-tier monsters like goblins. Just thinking about those small creatures made Nagi shudder slightly. In other words, the value and effort of this conquest, when compared to the rewards, were, as he mentally weighed them on an imaginary scale, he arrived at a conclusion, a complete loss. He glanced at the 4 warriors, deep in thought. In the end, this meager reward had to be split among 4 people. His gaze shifted to the group. Perhaps that was why the excitement of clearing the dungeon had vanished, replaced by a growing tension. Dunef and the blonde-haired warrior had already started arguing. Dona pointed an accusing finger. "What did you even do to deserve a bigger share?" "Huh?" The other warrior snapped back. "Says the guy who always takes more than his fair share. You have no right to talk." Even dividing the rewards had become a sensitive issue. The two of them were about to lose their tempers completely. Nagi, watching with a mischievous smile, thought, "What can I even say? This is an adventurer's issue. Nothing to do with me." He chuckled to himself, sinking into his own thoughts. A porter's payment was fixed, no matter how much loot the adventurers got. "So, before the mood gets any worse, let's wrap this up, shall we?" He spoke up cheerfully. "Thanks for all the hard work." Adventurers, holding 2 bottles in his hands, his large bag still slung over his back, he continued, "You guys must be thirsty. Have some water." He stepped forward, offering the drinks. Jeffnom, eyes closed, responded, "You even take care of us after the expedition ends." "Huh?" Facing Nagi, he added, "That smoke bomb you threw at the boss. Meeting you in this dungeon was probably the greatest treasure we got." Hearing that, Nagi laughed heartily. "You're exaggerating." Still smiling, he continued, "I just helped out a little, with my modest skills. That's all." Dona immediately stepped forward. "Modest skills?" His eyes narrowed. "The more I see, the more I wonder." His gaze fell on Nagi's bag. "That bag of yours. You can pull out an endless supply of weird, miraculous things." A sly grin formed on his face. Jeffnom, too, seemed to sense something. His expression darkened dangerously. "Yeah," he muttered, "that bag of yours. It might contain more than this entire dungeon." The blonde-haired adventurer, smirking, added, "Who knows, maybe it's a mountain of gold in disguise." Even the bearded warrior joined in, his face filled with mischief. "After all, you're the porter who gets paid 50 whole gold coins per expedition." Dona smirked cunningly and declared, "Like the captain said, the greatest treasure in this dungeon is that bag." The 4 adventurers lined up in front of Nagi. Greed had already taken root in their eyes. The atmosphere grew unbearably heavy. Nagi shut his eyes tightly and muttered, "Why is the mood suddenly so strange?" Then crack. The water bottle in his hand shattered. An arrow struck the ground right next to him. Another arrow came flying toward him. Startled, he shouted, "What the hell?" With a swift movement, he bent backward, narrowly avoiding the arrow as it whizzed past him. Gritting his teeth, Nagi dropped into a crouch and yelled, "What the hell are you guys doing?" The bearded warrior gripped his crossbow tightly. "Ah, seems like you dodged that one," he muttered, eyes gleaming with murderous intent. He looked at Nagi and said, "I was planning to end this in a single, painless strike." Then, with a casual tone, he continued, "But think about it. Adventuring is a profession where we risk our lives. We can't just leave empty-handed. Can we?" Donna chimed in, "Please don't hate us. We're in a tight spot ourselves, we have tributes to pay." "You see," he sighed dramatically, "honestly, a bag like that is way too much for a mere porter. Don't you think?" The four of them, now like men possessed, stepped closer. Nagi slowly rose to his feet, silently analyzing the situation. "So that's why porters so often end up dead in dungeons." He adjusted his grip on his green bag, planting his feet firmly on the ground. "Even if they kill me, all they have to do is claim that I was slain by goblins. No one would ever question them. No matter how much I help adventurers. In the end, I'm nothing more than a tool to them." The gratitude they once showed him had vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating gaze reserved for an object. But strangely enough, he wasn't surprised, nor was he afraid. Nagi straightened his back and stretched, as if shaking off the weight of reality. This is just how this world works. A world where people's roles are decided from birth. The treatment of porters, the lowest-ranking job, had never changed. Not once. Thinking about it, something within him cracked. He remembered when he first discovered his ability. The words from his notification echoed in his mind. "Your ability is, the bag." And then, the disdainful looks from those who never valued him. The laughter. The mockery. He remembered the day he tried to register as an adventurer. The woman at the counter had coldly rejected him. "With that ability?" she sneered. "You can't possibly be an adventurer." No matter how many times he asked, her response never changed. "Your job is a porter. Accept it." Holding up an official seal, she smirked. "If you're so eager to enter dungeons, then register as a porter." As soon as she finished speaking, she slammed the paper on the table. "The world has decided that I can't become an adventurer," he thought. "It assigned me the role of a porter." The realization made him feel slightly dazed. These guys must be thinking the same thing, right? Donna, seeing that he didn't react, spoke up, "If you understand." Then, before she could finish, a man wielding a spear leapt high and shouted, "Hand over all your belongings and die." He raised his spear dramatically and yelled again, "Stupid porter." Yet, Nagi didn't move an inch. He remained still, deep in thought. That decision wasn't mine to make, was it? His eyes glowed red from within his pupils. Swiftly, he reached into his bag. As Donna's spear came crashing down, he managed to pull out a sword just in time to block it. The attacker was shocked. He blocked it? Nagi wasted no time. He moved quickly, charging straight toward Donna. Without hesitation, he struck the pommel of his sword into his opponent's face. A powerful blow landed. The impact sent waves of pain across Donna's face, leaving him in agony as he collapsed to the ground. The bearded man witnessing the scene was stunned. He stammered, That guy." Nagi reached into his bag again and pulled out an axe. Without hesitation, he hurled it with immense force. The axe struck the crossbow in the bearded man's hands, embedding itself deep. His eyes widened in shock. Jeffnam and the blonde-haired man gasped. "Mouths agape." Jeffnam muttered in disbelief. How is this possible? Donna was defeated? Nagi landed safely on the ground, his stance firm. His large bag still rested on his back as he stood facing the remaining three. Jeffnam gritted his teeth in anger. At his command, his two remaining allies charged forward. "What nonsense is this? You guys can't even handle him?" Nagi hurled a vial with force. The liquid inside burst forth like a rushing river, splashing onto the two men. They screamed in agony. "Ah, it burns." Amid the chaos, Nagi rushed in, wielding a weapon in each hand. His eyes gleamed a fierce crimson. With a single slash, he split the blonde-haired man's shield in two, leaving him gaping in terror. A powerful strike followed, landing straight in the man's face. He was sent flying, crashing to the ground alongside his ally. Nagi gazed at them calmly. Jeffnam was the most astonished of all. His frustration grew as he furrowed his brows. Struggling to comprehend the situation, he took down 3 adventurers, by himself? Jeffnam, now face to face with Nagi, couldn't believe his eyes. Impossible. Isn't he just a mere rank white? His voice wavered as he asked directly. Who the hell are you? From Nagi's bag, countless weapons of various sizes emerged. With a sword in each hand, he stood firm, staring straight at Jeffnam. Me? His sharp gaze pierced through, and a faint smile played on his lips. I'm just a porter in the dungeon. Stepping out of the dungeon, Nagi slung his bag over his shoulder and secured the 4 captives together outside a shop. He coughed lightly as a carriage approached. Seeing the driver, Nagi's face lit up, and he waved enthusiastically. You're here, over here. The person stepping out of the carriage was Pacha, a rank white dungeon inspector. She approached him and asked, You're the porter, Nagi, correct? I received a report about an incident in the dungeon, so I came to investigate. Her eyes swept over the scene before her, and she hesitated slightly. But what exactly is this? She glanced at the 4 people tied up on the ground. Their faces flushed red. Turning back to Nagi, she asked, What happened in the dungeon? Nagi smiled and replied, Rather than explaining myself, it's better if you listen to this directly. He opened his bag, and suddenly, voices began to play from within. The recordings echoed clearly. Isn't it too extravagant for a mere porter to own an item like that? Let's just kill him quietly. Hearing this, Pacha was momentarily stunned before nodding seriously. Impressive. She then pulled out a notebook and began writing. A recording device disguised as a bag. What a useless design. But still, I should study it. She continued taking meticulous notes. A recording device designed like a bag, but ultimately impractical. Seeing her reaction, Nagi burst into laughter. Well, technically, it is just a bag that happens to record sound. Pacha closed her notebook and turned back to him. Regardless, this is enough evidence to prove they betrayed you and attempted to kill you. Nagi. Her gaze then shifted back to the bag, and she asked curiously, But what I really want to know is, how did a mere porter like you manage to defeat 4 adventurers? She studied the captives again before adding, And why do they look like they've been poisoned by mushroom spores? Hearing this, Nagi chuckled in amusement. Oh, so you know about smoked mushrooms? Pacha nodded. Of course, at the very least, I know that you shouldn't eat them in certain regions. Absorbing them causes muscle stiffness, dizziness, and a faint purple hue on the face. Nagi grinned and raised his index finger, explaining, Exactly, now that I think about it, everything makes sense. He recalled the moment it all happened. So basically, they just happened to eat some stew that contained those mushrooms. Right when they were about to attack me, the symptoms started to kick in. He smirked. I sure got lucky. Otherwise, how could a mere porter like me possibly subdue adventurers like them? Nagi glanced down at Jeffnam and asked, Isn't that right? I'm telling the truth, aren't I, adventurer? He closed his eyes briefly as Jeffnam, his face swollen, slowly looked up at him. Those words are lies. Jeffnam muttered. Yes, we ate the poisonous mushrooms, but we never did so willingly. Before we could even start a real fight, we had already fallen into his trap. Recalling the moment, Nagi burst into laughter. He called out and leapt high into the air. You're really a gold-rank adventurer? With a swift and decisive swing of his sword, he added, Not a mere rank white. Huh? Jeffnam blocked the attack, and the 2 clashed fiercely. Their movements were sharp, precise, and relentless. Nagi pressed forward with aggressive attacks, while Jeffnam focused solely on defense. As Nagi's sword grazed the ground, Jeffnam could only step back. I had a feeling something was off, Jeffnam thought. His expression grew more serious. Even if we had used up a lot of energy fighting the dungeon boss, there's no way my team should have lost to a mere porter. It just doesn't make sense. Hearing this, Nagi simply smiled. His lips moved slightly, whispering something inaudible. Then, with a loud laugh, Nagi lunged from above. You managed to defeat a goblin with those slow sword swings? The humiliation of being overwhelmed by a mere porter, combined with Nagi's taunting, completely shattered their composure. At that moment, rage surged through Jeffnam's veins. He roared furiously and charged straight at Nagi, a mere baggage carrier. In that heated moment, they failed to consider any other possibilities. Nagi, however, remained calm. He smirked and effortlessly deflected Jeffnam's attack. With a playful tone, he teased, Oh, close one, maybe next time, you'll actually hit me? Jeffnam, his frustration mounting, swung again. Nagi smoothly dodged and chuckled. Or maybe not. At that instant, Jeffnam raised his sword high and unleashed a powerful slash while simultaneously dashing toward Nagi. Yet once again, Nagi easily evaded. Leaping into the air, he intercepted the attack with playful ease. Laughing all the while, Jeffnam's face burned with frustration. He gritted his teeth and spat out, "You bastard." With all his strength, he delivered a fierce slash. But Nagi effortlessly slid across the ground, gracefully sidestepping the attack. "Excuse me, coming through," he quipped as he moved past. At that moment, Jeffnam finally realized the truth. We didn't lose because he was strong. We lost because I had grown weak. His eyes widened in shock as the realization sank in. His vision blurred, and his face turned a deeper shade of red. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. Confusion washed over him. Why is this happening? His stomach churned violently. Then, as the dizziness took hold, he murmured weakly, "No, I'm gonna throw up." Nagi closed his eyes and said, "Didn't I already tell you?" Then, he burst into laughter. "You've been poisoned." Recalling the moment when the four of them enjoyed their meal, he explained, "The food you just ate contained a toxic spore called smoke mushroom. It enhances the flavor of the dish, and also serves as insurance against fraudulent customers like you. Two birds with one stone, wouldn't you say?" Hearing this, Jeffnam gritted his teeth and demanded, "Poison?" He clenched his jaw tightly before shouting in anger, "So you intended to betray us from the start, didn't you, you damned porter?" Nagi simply laughed in amusement. Standing firmly on the ground, he confidently declared, "Why would a meticulous porter like me ever trust a bunch of shady adventurers like you? But like I said, this was just insurance. Whether or not it became an act of betrayal was entirely up to you. In a situation like this, using a catalyst would trigger the poison's effects immediately. But under normal circumstances, I would have given you the antidote after we cleared the dungeon to neutralize the poison." He shrugged, but some idiot broke the antidote. He then casually asked, "So tell me, what should I do now?" At that moment, Nagi held up a small bottle. "There's only one dose of antidote left." Though the situation was clear, trying to accuse him of poisoning them on purpose wouldn't be convincing. Jeffnam, recalling everything that had happened in the dungeon, clenched his fists in frustration and reluctantly admitted, "Yeah, we just had bad luck and ate the wrong stew." He spoke through hiccups, his voice filled with humiliation. Deep inside, he thought bitterly, "How could I ever admit that I lost to a mere porter? This is disgraceful." The four captives, still tied together, wailed in unison, "I wish we never ate that damn soup." Hearing this, Pacha placed a hand under her chin. Deep in thought, after a brief moment, she nodded and spoke decisively. "I understand the situation now. I'll take these criminals into custody." She ordered her subordinates to load them onto the carriage. Nagi hoisted his bag over his shoulder and smiled. "Well, my job's done. I'll be heading off now." "Pacha." As he turned to leave, she called out, "Wait, if you're heading back to the city, want to ride with us?" Nagi paused for a moment, then grinned, "Is it free?" With that, he climbed onto the carriage, joining her for the journey back. Sitting in the carriage, Pacha sighed as she turned to Nagi. "It's really unfortunate that you had to go through something like this, especially right after arriving in this city." Meanwhile, Nagi sat quietly, clutching his bag tightly beside her. Pacha's expression turned serious as she faced him. "On behalf of the Adventurers Guild, I apologize." Nagi suddenly burst into laughter. "Oh, don't worry about it. We porters are used to things like this." Even after hearing his response, Pacha remained solemn. "Is that so?" "Even so, there's something you should be aware of." She continued, "I know that you weren't at fault in this incident, but they won't see it that way." She glanced toward the four adventurers he had subdued. "These adventurers you defeated are from the Dawn Guild. That guild is infamous everywhere for its arrogance and lawlessness. No matter the reason, if one of their members gets injured, they always retaliate." She turned back to him, giving a firm warning, "So, you'd better be careful for a while." However, the only response she got was silence. She looked over and saw Nagi wrapped up in his green bag as if he had fallen asleep. She hesitated before asking in a hushed voice, Nagi, are you even listening?" A slightly shaky voice replied, "Yeah, I'm listening." Just then, a strange liquid spurted out from the mouth of a small bear inside the bag. Startled, Nagi grabbed its head and scolded, "Klasteni, I told you not to come out in front of people. They'll freak out if they see you." The creature responded simply, "But I'm hungry." Pacha, witnessing the bizarre exchange, gasped, "What the hell is that?" Without missing a beat, she pulled out her notebook and scribbled down a new entry. Observation number 2 discovered a strange creature inside the bag. Nagi scratched his head awkwardly and laughed. "It's nothing to worry about." He gestured to the small creature. "This little thing is Clasteni. It's been living in my bag for a long time. It helps organize the items in my bag. Before Clasteni came along, my stuff was always tangled up. In exchange, it eats a ton of magic stones." Clasteni looked up at him expectantly. Nagi rubbed his chin, considering the situation. This dungeon run was really chaotic. So I guess it must have been busy. On top of that, I got the entire dungeon's reward for myself. A sly grin spread across his face. Normally, it would have been split among the 4 adventurers. Feeling generous, he handed Clasteni twice the usual amount of magic stones. "Since I'm in a good mood today, let's double your magic stone ration." Clasteni squealed happily, munching away. Watching this, Pacha leaned forward in curiosity. "This is the first time I've ever seen a creature like that. A living being that eats magic stones." Nagi cradled Clasteni in his arms and replied with a wry smile. "To be honest, it's the first time I've seen one too. But it doesn't cause any harm. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship." She was surprised after hearing that and praised his brother, saying he was quite interesting. "No, I should say that your bag is truly remarkable. I've never heard of a bag like that before." Suddenly, the horse reared up on its hind legs as if it had lost control. Bei questioned his subordinates. "What's wrong with the horses?" The coachman responded, "I don't know, they just suddenly went wild." At that moment, deep inside New Nagi, a red glow swirled into a vortex. He thought to himself, "Wait." He looked around and sensed something unusual. Everywhere was covered in a dark aura. There was no doubt about it. This was a dungeon break. But why was it happening here? He called out, "Inspector, over there." He pointed ahead to show her. "I can sense a dungeon break happening behind the mountain," he said, directing his hand toward the nearby peak. Upon hearing this, Pacha raised her voice in surprise. "A dungeon break?" She tensed up and stood behind him. "This is serious. Do you have some kind of magic tool to detect it?" Nagi slowly opened his eyes and replied, "It's instinct." She was confused. "Instinct? What do you mean?" she asked. Gripping onto a nearby wooden beam, he urged, "Hurry, we don't have time." Nagi clenched his teeth and turned to her, instructing, "We have to get there before anyone gets hurt." She was still lost in her own thoughts. Sensing a dungeon break through instinct? That's ridiculous. Even an inspector like me wouldn't have noticed it. Clasteni spoke up. "It's real. A dungeon break." He tried to explain. "I love mana stones, so I can smell them clearly. The scent is overwhelming. It's coming from behind that mountain." His determination was evident. She was quite surprised but finally responded, "Understood. Let's go check it out." A dungeon break occurs when a dungeon has existed for an extended period. Over time, it undergoes a catastrophic event known as a dungeon break, when the monsters inside burst out in a frenzy, indiscriminately attacking everything in their path. "This is why we must conquer dungeons in this world," she said, watching as the dungeon break unfolded before her eyes. Pacha muttered, "It's real, a dungeon break." She continued, "It has surpassed its critical limit. It could break at any moment." She then glanced at Nagi and asked, "How can you sense it from such a great distance?" Nagi's gaze remained resolute as he replied, "I will never forget this feeling. Never." He recalled his past self, covered in filth. It was something they must never forget, just how terrifying a dungeon break could become. Standing atop the mountain, he envisioned the impending inferno. Monsters would soon be roaming freely in the sky and on the ground. Hearing his words, she suddenly felt a sense of doubt. Has this man experienced a dungeon break before? Her eyes narrowed in frustration. But even so, how could he possibly sense it? He spoke up, noting that something was strange. The two of them stood on the hill. Observing the situation, he began analyzing. If there's a dungeon this close to the village, there's no way adventurers haven't already conquered it. Pacha flipped through a record book behind him and agreed. That's right. According to the records, this dungeon had already been assigned. Annoyed, he asked, "Who took the mission, and what rank are they?" She checked the documents and replied, "This is a rank D cracked dungeon." The adventurer who accepted the mission was a midran rank adventurer, accompanied by 2 bronze rank adventurers. Nagi furrowed his brows in contemplation. A midran rank adventurer inside a rank D dungeon? If that was the case, His suspicions deepened. He focused intensely before stating, "I think we need to go to the village and confirm something." Hearing his words, she bluntly asked, "You're suspecting something, aren't you?" Then, turning to the guards, she instructed, "Guards, can you escort these criminals back to the prison for me?" Resolute, she turned back to him and said, "As a dungeon inspector, I will accompany you." The two of them headed toward the village gates. As they approached, they saw a crowd gathering. He spoke first. "Something must have happened here." She felt the same. Yes, judging by how agitated they are, this should have been dealt with long ago. But if they keep delaying the dungeon conquest and a dungeon break happens. At the center of the crowd stood two people. The woman, Nero, was a bronze-rank martial artist, while the young man, Desta, was a bronze-rank necromancer. Nero addressed the crowd. "Go tell your captain." Desta added, "We're not responsible for this." He then shouted, "What do you expect us to do when the captain has already abandoned us?" The villagers erupted into angry shouts, cursing them furiously. Nagi took in the scene and thought to himself, "I was right. Based on the current situation, my suspicions were correct. This dungeon was abandoned. This happened when the leader of a party, someone ranked higher than the dungeon itself, initially accepted a dungeon but later found a more valuable one. In such cases, they would abandon the lower-ranked dungeon, leaving it to its fate." Pecha stood in front of him and said, "Of course, the guild will penalize cases like this." He remained calm and asked her, "But it's nothing more than a mosquito bite, isn't it?" She bluntly admitted, "That's right." His mind grew irritated. "So that's how it is. Those adventurers could get away with just a fine, while the villagers here would lose everything. The dungeon would break tonight. Even if they called for assistance from the Adventurers Guild, by the time help arrived, the village would already be in ruins. And yet, these adventurers were still spouting irresponsible excuses." Desta lowered his head slightly before raising his voice to the villagers. "We're victims too. Our captain disappeared, and now we're stuck wasting time here. Whether the dungeon breaks or not, why are you blaming us?" He continued, "If you have complaints, file an official grievance with the Adventurers Guild. We're not responsible, so we don't need to listen to your nonsense." Nagi stood at the center of the argument, silently observing, "Adventurers aren't heroes or saviors. They're ruthless individuals who only care about their own gains. But even so, in this situation, we need their strength, because only adventurers can stop a dungeon break, not a mere porter like me." Pecha, standing behind him, sighed, "This is really unlucky, but we should focus on evacuating the villagers. Saving lives has to be the priority." Hearing that, he curiously repeated, "Saving lives?" Clutching the emblem on his chest, he questioned, "Do you truly believe we can save them?" She raised her voice in response. "Excuse me, what exactly do you mean by that?" But he ignored her, leaving her standing alone. "Think about it," he muttered. His eyes drifted somewhere far away, and he spoke softly. "Winter is coming, and those who lose their homes, do you think they'll survive the long, harsh cold?" Still gripping the emblem, he suddenly flung his hand outward and declared, "Impossible. What this village needs right now isn't a mere porter." He glanced down at the emblem in his hand. Its color had changed to gold. Stunned, he realized what had happened. Then, a wide, joyful grin spread across his face as he burst into laughter. Well, look what we have here," he exclaimed. Delighted, with newfound confidence, he fastened his new emblem onto his chest and turned to Nero and Desta. "A dungeon break just happens to occur the moment I arrive in this village?" He smirked. Then, looking at Pecha, he asked, "Inspector, tell me, anyone who conquers a dungeon gets the full reward without paying any fees, correct?" She was bewildered by his reaction but still answered, Yes, that's correct." Nagi burst into laughter and shouted, "Jackpot!" His loud reaction successfully caught the attention of Nero and Desta. Desta turned to him and asked, "Who is this guy?" Nero added, "Don't tell me, he's actually planning to enter that dungeon?" When the two of them looked back, they noticed Nagi's emblem. They both gasped in unison. "What, a gold rank adventurer?" The emblem had a circular border with a sword engraved at its center. Seeing this, they started reconsidering. If that's the case, maybe it's actually possible. Nagi scratched his head and casually asked them, "Oh, you two planning to join as well? If so, the reward split will be 9-1. He had a smug, almost devious look on his face as he asked, "Deal? Right now, I'm just pretending to be an adventurer," he thought to himself. For a moment, he forced a grin and asked Pecha, "Hey, Inspector, What's the penalty for impersonating an adventurer? She answered seriously. If I'm not mistaken, the fine is at least 1.000 gold coins. Hearing that number, he felt his stomach drop, and his expression stiffened. Suddenly, a massive rock shattered, releasing a surge of energy, an unmistakable sign that the cracked dungeon was breaking apart. In this world, dungeons are spatial distortions connected to an unknown dimension. These cracked dungeons are accessible through spatial rifts and are only recommended for adventurers with gold rank emblems or higher. Unlike normal dungeons, these are unpredictable. Inside, ferocious monsters lurk, waiting for adventurers, while heavily armored knights might assume that victory simply requires eliminating all monsters. Experienced adventurers know better. The true enemy inside a cracked dungeon isn't just the monsters, it's the dungeon itself. Even veteran adventurers struggle to predict the dungeon's conditions or the requirements to clear it. 3 reckless adventurers had entered this unstable dungeon before, only to find themselves in grave danger. From the moment they stepped inside, fear gripped them. I told you we shouldn't have entered. Get me out of here. Please, one of them screamed in panic. Meanwhile, Naji's group showed no signs of hesitation. Unlike the previous adventurers, they advanced confidently toward the cracked dungeon, ready to clear it as quickly as possible. Peicha held an hourglass in her hand, monitoring the situation closely. Based on my mana threshold calculations, this dungeon will collapse in 1 hour, she announced. Naji's expression sharpened. That means we have exactly 1 hour to clear the dungeon and prevent the break. She anxiously watched the hourglass, unable to hide her worry. 1 hour, no matter what we encounter. This will be tough, she murmured, especially since this was a cracked dungeon. Nagi had no clear plan either. Let's just hope this one belongs to the easy category. Taking a bold step forward, he declared, we can't waste even a second. With a heavy bag strapped to his back, he moved toward the rift, urging everyone, let's go. A blinding light radiated from the crack, as if leading to another world. The entire space was bathed in a golden hue, with fragments of the dungeon floating freely. Even Nero, usually composed, was stunned. The 4 of them stared at massive stones suspended in midair. She was thrilled. Just moments ago, it was nighttime, but now we're in another world? This is a dungeon, Nagi confirmed. Excitement surged within Nero and Desta. Desta grinned as he effortlessly lifted a floating rock with one hand. The historic first dungeon conquest of Van Desta, the rising star of adventure, begins now. Nero, equally determined, clenched her fists. I'll make those guild bastards see who I really am. Desta, pumped up by her energy, declared, hell yeah, I'll put on such a show that they'll be left speechless. Watching the 2 of them laughing confidently, Peicha whispered to Nagi, sometimes, ignorance really is bliss, huh? Yet, worry clouded her face. The tension was evident in her eyes. Just from looking around, I already know we're doomed, she admitted. Nagi felt the same way. A cold sweat ran down his back as unease settled in. Judging from the terrain, there's only one way forward. He exhaled sharply. We have to climb. Glancing upward, he saw the towering ascent ahead. Peicha hesitated before asking, so, we need to climb that within an hour? Her expression darkened as frustration flared. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Nagi? Annoyed, she crossed her arms. You lied to me. Sensing the rising tension, Nagi awkwardly scratched his head and chuckled. I didn't mean any harm. So, you won't report me, right? Peicha sighed, still irritated. But we don't really have a choice. Do we? Deep down, Nagi wasn't confident in himself, especially in front of Nero and Desta. If I had asked for help as just a porter, no adventurer would have followed me. That's why he had lied to grab their attention. But a gold rank adventurer? That was a different story. The moment others saw that emblem, they would instinctively follow. Despite how forced his actions were, his intentions were genuine. If they failed to clear this dungeon, the break would happen. He met Peicha's gaze. You knew that's why you came with us, right? Peicha always carried the responsibility of saving lives on her shoulders. The dungeon collapse had to be stopped. If they failed, the villagers would be in mortal danger. While Peicha and Nagi were deeply worried, Nero, on the other hand, smiled carefreely. She activated her limbs, ready for battle. What's there to worry about? Humans really are boring, she said. True to her words, Nero took a running start and leapt across the floating rocks in the air. I'll climb to the top myself. No problem at all. Desta was shocked by her reckless actions. That's dangerous, and you know it. Just then, an unexpected force suddenly pulled at Nero's hand. She was mid-air, so she was quite surprised that someone was trying to stop her. Confused and unsure of what was happening, she suddenly found herself frozen in place, stiff as a board. It turned out that Desta had pulled her back, causing her to crash onto the ground. "You idiot, I'm only worried because we're friends." Desta scolded her bluntly. "You've been acting without thinking ever since training camp." But Nero refused to be lectured. "And you, did you just ignore me? Huh?" Desta knew her better than anyone. "You deserved that. Do you even remember what we were taught at training camp? A detached dungeon might have restrictions or curses." Nero was furious that he dared to underestimate her. "Of course, I know that. Or, do I?" Just then, Peicha created a blue flame with a single finger. She had used her special ability to investigate. The first step in any detached dungeon is to identify its curse. Their reconnaissance device detected something, leaving Nero and Desta bewildered. "What the? Why am I chained?" From the way the four of them were bound together, Peicha deduced that this was likely the dungeon's curse. "We're connected by invisible chains that we can neither see nor touch. This means we must move together, no one can be left behind." Nero felt slightly disappointed. "That means I can't show off my skills." Nagi, however, remained completely unfazed, his expression calm. "Looks like shortcuts and tricks won't work here." He then opened a large bag and pulled out an anchor already tied to a rope. "Fortunately, we brought plenty of climbing tools." Nero was surprised by his level of preparation as an assortment of equipment spilled out from the bag. It seemed that Nagi had found a way to climb up. Holding the anchor in his hand, he smiled with relief. "We'll go step by step. That's the key to clearing dungeons based on strategy. Don't waste your stamina trying to climb too fast." The floating rocks in the air were all gray, except for one that was covered in blue. However, they also couldn't move too slowly, they had to maintain a balanced pace. With ease, Nagi placed his foot on a rock and moved forward. The four of them leapt onto rocks of varying heights. Following his lead, "Follow my instructions carefully," he reminded them. "And remember, since we're chained together, don't let the distance between us get too wide." Even as the wind tried to hinder their progress, Nagi remained composed. "We need to maintain a fixed distance while moving." Behind him, Nero grew impatient. "Leader, you're too slow. Let me run ahead and lead the way." "Not allowed," Nagi replied firmly. Reckless moves were out of the question. He had already calculated the most efficient way to climb up while minimizing wasted time. Rushing ahead recklessly would be far worse than moving a little slower but following a well-thought-out path to avoid backtracking. He was moving faster now, but a lingering sense of unease remained in his mind. After all, even with careful planning, dungeons like this always had unexpected variables. Then, suddenly, something made Nagi freeze for 5 whole seconds. Right in front of him stood a massive stone boar. The problem? There were no more floating rocks to climb up. Detached dungeons were always full of unpredictable surprises. But the strangest thing was that the stone boar had its mouth open. As if waiting for a small rock to float in, it calmly and gently closed its mouth around the rock before swallowing it. Nagi quickly realized that the creature's habit of eating the rocks was the reason he couldn't climb any higher. The path forward had been completely cut off, all because of an unknown monster. Peicha, with her vast knowledge, immediately recognized it. She flipped through a book she carried and confirmed. "That's a rock-eating boar," she assured the group. "It's strong, but not aggressive. As long as we don't provoke it, we should be fine." According to her book, the rock-eating boar usually lived in rocky areas. "I never expected to find one in a place like this. Fascinating." More importantly, the boar wasn't digesting the rocks, it was spitting them back out just as quickly. It constantly ate and expelled rocks, reshaping the dungeon's layout as it moved. Peicha's mood seemed to lighten as she observed the creature. "The dungeon ecosystem is really interesting, isn't it?" Nagi noticed her change in demeanor and remarked. "You seem pretty excited." She smiled sheepishly. "Sorry, it's just, this is my first time seeing one in real life." Nagi was furious when the stone boar ate the platforms above. That was exactly the problem. The stone platforms we were aiming for had completely disappeared. Our only option now was. He immediately pulled out something he thought would be useful. "Throw this grappling hook and secure the rope onto the boar." Nagi had already considered the worst-case scenario. If the hook was thrown incorrectly. But if we miss and provoke it. He imagined how small he was. Before its wrath, the stone boar might become aggressive. And we didn't have the time or energy to fight it. Desta, confident in his skills, felt a surge of power from his gloves. If that's the issue. He grew excited, asking Nagi for permission to showcase his abilities. Finally, it's my time to shine. The captain hadn't even given his approval. But Desta had already activated his gloves magic. Watch closely, everyone. He fired 2 bullets from his arm, which had transformed into a gun. Witness how I, Vanesta, will overcome this challenge. But unexpectedly, they weren't bullets. They were 2 transforming fingers. The necromancer's unique ability, summoning fingers. In the blink of an eye, the fingers turned into stone men. However, their structure wasn't very stable. A shoddy golem, a fake sword, and a flimsy club. Nagi couldn't help but praise, which made Desta scratch his head in embarrassment. Impressive. Summoning abilities are quite rare. Pecha, now in a better mood, suggested, if your summoned creatures can catch the hook, we could hold onto the rope, without provoking the stone boar. But Nagi still felt uneasy. He couldn't bring himself to open his eyes. Something felt off. The summoned stone men didn't look right. Their entire bodies trembled as if electrocuted. One of their necks suddenly twisted to the side. It looked like it might snap at any moment. The stone men swayed as they tried to stand. Just as he feared, Nero finally spoke up. I already know what your level is. In training camp, you were famous for making things explode. I will never trust your summoned creatures. His reputation was built on always losing control and causing his summons to explode. Desta had long been dizzy from all the pressure, but he still tried to explain. Shut up. Controlling summons is like looking into a mirror and moving left or right separately. But as long as we can cross within 5 minutes, we'll be fine. I'll do my best. Pecha and Nagi stood dumbfounded as they watched the 2 stone men struggle to balance on the stone boar. Holding the grappling hook in hand, he steeled his resolve. It's risky, but we don't have time to waste. Before throwing it forward, Nagi turned back and reminded his teammates. Cross over before it explodes. The grappling hook, securely attached to a rope, was swung out with precision. However, the 2 rock creatures displayed remarkable coordination. They grabbed each other's hands and swung forward to catch the hook. As calculated, it latched firmly onto one of them. Gripping the rope tightly, Nagi placed his hopes on them. Sorry, please hang in there for a little while. Are you even worried about yourself? Desta asked. Remember, I have a neural link with my summoned creature. I can feel everything it does. Without hesitation, Nagi focused on climbing, carefully maneuvering every step. This dungeon was clearly high level. Before long, the 4 of them had made it halfway through. Nagi felt relieved but also acknowledged their luck. He hadn't expected the hook to get stuck on the rock creature's face rather than another part of its body. Desta's strength played a crucial role in their movement, and the synergy between their abilities was proving incredibly effective for this dungeon, especially with the summoned creature, which made things significantly easier. However, fatigue was starting to set in. Something felt off. The rope no longer seemed as secure as before. It had only been 3 minutes. Yet something was wrong. The 3 teammates behind him suddenly cried out. Hurry up, we can't hold on much longer. Nagi's worry deepened. Why do you all look so nervous? Desta, smiling despite the tense situation, dropped a shocking revelation. Sorry, but it's about to explode. He quickly explained, since its head got cracked. It's losing control. I feel nauseous. I can't hold it in anymore. Nagi and Pecha froze. Wait, what do you mean he's going to? The rock creature had already swollen up like a balloon, looking like it could burst at any moment. And just as expected, it exploded within seconds. The moment the grappling hook was ejected from the creature, the surrounding rock formations crumbled. Chaos erupted as Nagi's team was thrown into a free fall. Suspended midair, Nagi let out a terrified scream. We're done for. Pecha tried to stay composed. Find something to grab onto. Meanwhile, Nero panicked. I don't want to go back to the starter village. Meow. At that moment, Nagi refused to consider giving up. No, if we fall all the way to the bottom, there'll be no way to climb back up. Even as danger loomed, he forced himself to remain calm. I have to find a way to minimize the damage. And then, he remembered. His massive backpack. The ultimate lifesaver. The secret weapon of someone who carries everything. Fortunately, all 4 of them landed safely thanks to the item he had brought, a safety airbag. However, for some reason, Nagi's group was thrown out. Struggling to stay on his feet against the strong wind, Nagi steadied himself while the others were still bewildered. Summoning all his strength, he retrieved the large bag he had carried. His concern for his teammates remained unchanged. "Is everyone okay?" he asked. Peicha quickly corrected herself, unintentionally showing her recognition of him. "Yes, thanks to you, our homeless adventurer," she said, patting her best friend's head in praise. "Well done." Van Desta clutched the pocket watch in her hand, worried as time was running out. "But our progress has been severely hindered," she noted. Only Peicha gazed up at the sky. "Can we reach the summit within the time limit?" she wondered aloud. No one knew what other secret tools Nagi was hiding. "Damn, there's no other way, if we want to make it in time." His expression darkened. From that moment, his tone and demeanor became so intense that Nero was on the verge of tears. "We have no choice. You'll have to keep up with me," he declared, putting on his special frog gloves. "From now on, brace yourselves." This was the unique climbing tool of a gear-carrying adventurer, adhesive climbing gloves. Nagi took the lead, extending his hand to pull her up. "We're going straight to the top." Desta was utterly shocked. Climbing straight up. Hearing his words, Desta instinctively looked down at the abyss beneath them. No one could afford to let their guard down for even a second. If one of us falls, we all fall. As they neared the summit, the dangers increased. Unexpected traps appeared more frequently. While climbing, Nagi was suddenly startled by a rolling rock. A falling boulder forced Peicha to drop her gun as she lost her balance. Nagi had to drop to one knee, skidding on the slippery ice. Meanwhile, Nero was furious. A monkey had deliberately thrown a banana peel, causing her to slip. "Endure it," she muttered, gritting her teeth. Curious, Nero approached the strange-looking rock. "It looks weird." Before she could react, the rock exploded. "Don't step on it," Nagi warned. "That's a detonating rock, covered in dirt and mud." Nero and Desta were exhausted. "Spare me, meow?" Desta groaned, too tired to shout like before. "How much farther do we have to go?" she whined, turning back with a bright smile. Nagi reassured her. "We're almost there, just a little bit more." Desta was on the verge of tears. "You've said that 10 times already." Nero, on the other hand, had a completely different thought. "I became an adventurer to fight monsters, not to climb mountains. I didn't sign up to be a mountaineer." Nagi reassured them once more. "This time, I'm telling the truth." Before him stood a grand castle atop a rocky peak. From here, they could clearly see the summit. A dragon-headed monster glared at them. "It looks like the boss monster is waiting for us up there," Nagi observed. Nero's thirst for battle ignited. Finally, a real monster. He was so moved he almost cried. At last, Van Desta's first official battle under her name had arrived. "I'm going to crush that boss monster and wipe the smirks off those guild bastards who dared to rank me as bronze." "Meow," she declared excitedly. Her fighting spirit surged. Desta had been holding a grudge for a long time. "Exactly. How dare they treat us like that when we were top of the training camp?" Only now did Nagi fully grasp the situation. Based on their physical abilities and unique skills, these two clearly did not belong in the bronze rank. He could also guess why they were so determined. Necromancers were often looked down upon, and the freemen had only recently escaped slavery. Nero had faith in his strength. "In the worst-case scenario, our captain will handle it, right?" Desta continued showering him with praise. "Of course. After all, he's a gold-rank adventurer." However, they were unaware of Nagi's concerns. "I brought these two along so they could deal with monsters, but—" Peicha suddenly interrupted their conversation. "Wait a moment." Her gaze lifted toward the sky, her face filled with unease. Something isn't right. From what she had observed, she knew about this type of monster. The boss monster at the peak is a serpent-scale dragon, but serpent-scale dragons aren't supposed to be purple. If it was purple, then there was only one possibility. Her guess was unexpectedly accurate. The monster's eyes were completely white. "It's already dead." Nagi was stunned by the revelation. "What did you just say?" The sword embedded in the monster's body was still intact, untouched. Then, a white-haired man emerged. Durakan was leaning against the lifeless monster, deep in sleep. Only when he heard their commotion did he stir. "What's with all the noise?" As he opened his eyes, he seemed surprised by what he saw before him. Nagi, standing below, looked up at him. His instincts were always eerily accurate. This presence, it was killing intent. Without hesitation, Durakan leapt from the castle in the clouds, plummeting straight toward them. No matter how fierce the wind, nothing could push him off course. His target was clear, Nagi's group. Durakan brushed past Nagi in an instant. His expression was anything but pleasant. Nagi barely had time to react before turning around to assess the situation. The emblem on Durakan's chest immediately caught his eye. It was a mark of high status. A single glance was enough for Nagi to recognize it as a divine stone rank insignia. If that were the case, then this wasn't just a matter of an abandoned dungeon. In the worst-case scenario, this man had no interest in wasting time with them. What a nuisance, Durakan muttered. The four of them surrounded him, though even he hadn't expected to run into Nagi's group. I didn't think anyone would enter this dungeon, Durakan admitted. His motives were unclear, but one thing was certain, he was determined to see this dungeon collapse. Nagi had already classified him as an enemy. There were people like this, those who acted with deliberate intent. Durakan cracked his knuckles. Well then, let's just simplify things. His overconfidence, along with his attempt to frame Nagi's group, became evident. You four died during the dungeon exploration, he declared coldly. And according to official records, you're the ones responsible for the dungeon collapse. The moment he spoke, a series of system notifications flashed before them. In this world, adventurers registered with the Adventurers Guild were ranked according to their abilities. Each rank came with a distinct emblem. The first image displayed was a silver diamond-shaped badge, positioned at the center. At the very bottom of the hierarchy was White Iron rank, given to those in non-combat roles. This rank was primarily assigned to labor-intensive jobs, such as dungeon porters, mining workers, and guild staff. Next was Bronze rank, a round emblem with a central diamond, but this time in a reddish-bronze color. Only those with a minimum combat aptitude were recognized as Bronze rank adventurers. An image of a warrior wielding a sword, exuding authority, accompanied the description. Even the lowest-ranked adventurers possessed abilities far beyond ordinary people. Following that was Silver rank, which had a silver badge with a bluish tint. The color variations signified different levels within the rank. Silver rank adventurers were seasoned veterans, individuals capable of handling dungeon expeditions independently. A matching image appeared, a red-haired man carrying an enormous weapon, looking every bit like a battle-hardened fighter. According to guild records, this was the most common rank among adventurers. The explanation didn't stop there. Next was Gold rank, a radiant golden emblem. Adventurers at this rank were capable of leading dungeon raids as commanders. As proof, an image of three men appeared, with the central figure holding the Gold rank emblem. At a glance, this seemed to be the highest and most authoritative rank. It required exceptional talent or equivalent experience in dungeon raids. These were the standard adventurer ranks. However, there was another rank, a rare elite classification recognized only for a select few adventurers. This was the Divine Stone rank. The Divine Stone emblem appeared, a simple yet extraordinary light gray badge. The explanation continued. Adventurers of this rank were often referred to as beyond human rank. Reaching this peak meant they were anything but ordinary. An image materialized, a warrior in a modern-style outfit, with a black and gold color scheme. His muscular build and strong stance radiated power. Behind him, a brilliant golden-orange light shone, symbolizing overwhelming strength. It was described as a rank achievable only by those who had transcended human limits. This was the face of absolute authority and supremacy. Back to reality. Durakan landed safely, the impact so immense that the ground beneath him caved in. Witnessing this, Nagi cursed under his breath. Damn it, even from his aura alone, Nagi could feel it, the overwhelming power. He stole a quick glance at Durakan. His broad shoulders and towering back loomed before them. The gap in strength was undeniable. Even if we attack together, we don't stand a chance. Durakan was both physically imposing and ruthlessly cruel. His deep crimson eyes glowed ominously. Nagi suddenly turned to Peicha. Do you know who this adventurer is? Peicha's expression grew serious. There are only a few Divine Stone rank adventurers in this city. She stared at Durakan for a moment before speaking. He's from that arrogant guild I mentioned before, Dawnbreak Guild. He's their assault captain, Durakan the Forsaken, so that was his infamous title. Looking at his face, the name seemed to suit him perfectly. Hearing this, Durakan's eyes narrowed. No wonder you looked familiar. He scoffed. So you're that brat from the guild association. The man extended his hand and spoke with a contemptuous tone. But what are you doing in this dungeon? Playing the role of an adventurer? And not just any adventurer, but one from a mere White Iron rank guild? Faced with such mocking words, Peicha froze in place. However, She took a bold step forward and responded firmly. That's exactly what I should be asking you. As she approached the man, she showed no fear and looked up at him, shouting, Durakan, attack captain of the Dawn Guild. Why haven't you cleared this dungeon yet? It's on the verge of collapsing. Peicha continued to reprimand him. Isn't preventing dungeon collapses the foremost duty of an adventurer? Durakan smirked, his lips curling into a sinister grin. Duty? He let out a loud, crazed laugh as if mocking her. Then, he leaned forward and sneered. What duty? Adventurers act in their own self-interest, he said with a scheming expression. For example, a dungeon collapse might bring greater benefits than clearing it. Don't you think? Peicha stiffened, furrowing her brows at him. Nagi stood silently, observing the conversation, lost in thought. So that's how it is. He had never seen adventurers as heroes or saviors. But hearing such vile words from Durakan made his blood boil. He never expected someone this despicable. At that moment, anger surged within Nagi. If he's deliberately causing a dungeon collapse, I must stop him at all costs. His hands clenched tightly, his resolve firm, but then, he suddenly relaxed his grip. He reconsidered his own strength. Was he really capable of going against Durakan? The man was ranked at the Divine Stone level. A head-on confrontation would be suicide. Nagi placed a hand on the strap of his bag, quickly forming a plan in his mind. For now, he needed to break the tense atmosphere. Thinking fast, he reached into his oversized backpack and laughed heartily. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Dear adventurer. Durakan's attention was successfully diverted. Nagi beamed and said, We're just passing adventurers who happened to stumble upon this dungeon. We have no intention of getting in your way. Durakan seemed intrigued by something inside the bag and stepped closer. Nagi seized the moment. Please, consider this a token of our apology. With that, he pulled out a skewer of meat, grilled to perfection and visually enticing. Durakan stared at it, confused. Food? From a sack? Seeing his interest, Nagi swiftly capitalized on it. Spending so much time in a dungeon must have made you hungry. Right? A fresh, hot meal, just for you. On the surface, Nagi wore a bright, cheerful smile, but deep inside, his thoughts were serious. Fighting this piece of trash head-on won't work. If that's the case, I'll weaken him first. Durakan happily enjoyed the food Nagi had given him. He devoured it like a child, exclaiming in delight, Amazing, it's still warm, like it was freshly grilled. Incredible. Holding a piece of meat in his hand, he shouted, This is truly fantastic. His eyes gleamed as he placed a hand on Nagi's shoulder and shook him excitedly. The grilling is perfect, and the texture of the shrimp is just right. Hearing this, Nagi let out a sly smirk. Eat up, because that skewer contains. But suddenly, Durakan's voice dropped, and his grip on Nagi's shoulder tightened. His eyes narrowed dangerously. The exquisite smoky mushroom flavor in the sauce, he murmured. With his keen senses, Durakan had already figured it out. That skewer was no ordinary meal. You really thought that cheap trick would work on me? Nagi froze. I'm done for. This is my way of paying for the meal. Durakan sneered. Before Nagi could react, Durakan raised his fist and lunged forward without hesitation. At that moment, Nagi's face and Durakan's fist were only centimeters apart. And in the blink of an eye, he took the full impact of the devastating punch and was sent flying. Not only him, but the others were also caught up in the chaos due to the cursed chains binding them. Nero was thrown off guard. She looked at the chain in her hands and instinctively let out a startled, meow. Her feet struggled to stay grounded, trying not to be swept away. Captain, she cried out desperately. Gripping the chain tightly, she pulled it with all her strength to keep herself from being flung any further. Fortunately, Peicha and Nagi managed to land safely beside a small patch of land. However, as the chain grew taut, Nero panicked even more. Meow meow, what do we do now? Out of nowhere, Durakan appeared behind her, his expression dark and twisted into a malicious grin. You lot must be a bunch of rookies. He scoffed. You can't even break a simple cursed binding chain. How pathetic. Hearing that, Nero shot him a confused glance. Meow. But before she could react, Durakan suddenly let out a thunderous roar and dashed straight toward them. The sheer force of his movement sent shockwaves through the dungeon. The loud impact snapped Nero out of her daze, making her spin around in alarm. His voice rang out menacingly. Those were your last words. And with that, he launched a brutal punch. Nero had no time to react. She could only stare at him in fear as the attack came crashing toward her. Then, A familiar voice rang out, snapping her back to reality. Don't just stand there like that. Nero. Desta shot forward like a rocket, charging straight toward the battlefield. A sudden, massive explosion erupted, sending debris flying in all directions. Thick dust clouds filled the air, obscuring everything from view. Through the dense haze, Durakan emerged, walking forward slowly like a relentless beast, his sharp gaze fixed on the three of them as he sneered. What is this crude summoned creature supposed to be? Despite the situation, he couldn't resist mocking them. What, is your summoner still a rookie? Desta glared at Durakan with eyes filled with fury. His voice was cold and sharp. It was you, wasn't it? The captain approved our entry into the dungeon, only to abandon us afterward. Hearing those words, Durakan chuckled darkly. What was that? He stroked his chin with a sly grin and began to taunt them. I was just wondering who in their right mind would willingly enter a dungeon known for devouring its intruders. Turns out, it was you lot, a necromancer and a beastkin? No wonder people call you a bunch of idiots. Desta clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white, his eyes burned with rage. But he took a deep breath to steady himself. Don't worry, Nero. Once the captain returns, it'll be 3 against 1. All we need to do is hold out until then. With that, both of them, along with the stone creature, assumed their battle stances. Desta furrowed his brows and gave one last instruction. Especially against physical attacks, the lightning-linked golems can withstand a good amount of damage. Let's stick to the strategy we practiced in training. Without hesitation, all 3 of them lunged forward with relentless force. Yet, rather than feeling fear or concern, Durakan only grew more excited. Meanwhile, another brutal battle was unfolding elsewhere. At that moment, Nagi and Pecha had yet to recover fully. Nagi lay unconscious, slumped against a large rock. After some time, his eyes slowly fluttered open. He winced, raising a hand to his wound before suddenly snapping back to awareness. Seeing this, Pecha hurried over and asked, Are you alright, Nagi? I already performed first aid on you. He let out a tired sigh. Thanks, I must have blacked out for a while. What's the situation? Pecha's expression darkened. To be honest, not great. Over there, the fight is still raging on. She quickly updated him. Nero and Desta are holding their ground. But their strength, it's still nothing more than a mere inconvenience in Durakan's eyes. At that moment, Nero launched her knee upward, preparing to strike, but reality was far from kind. Durakan had already anticipated her move, effortlessly blocking her attack. Nero quickly adjusted, rising onto her toes before lunging forward with an attempted counterattack. However, to her dismay, Desta's stone golem had already been seized. Durakan had snapped its neck with his bare hands and was now using its body as a shield, effortlessly deflecting her relentless strikes. A crazed grin spread across his face as he burst into maniacal laughter. With his overwhelming strength, Durakan grabbed the golem and swung it around like a massive flail. The sheer force of the motion created an immense shockwave, sending both Nero and Desta hurtling through the air. The two were thrown back, making it nearly impossible for them to regain control or launch another attack. Then, Pecha's voice rang out. As expected, this opponent is far too strong for them to hold out much longer. Desta's expression twisted in frustration. He struggled against the overwhelming force but couldn't even put a scratch on Durakan. Meanwhile, Nero, despite enduring agonizing blows, showed no signs of backing down. Nagi, still recovering, lifted his head and muttered bitterly. I made a mistake. I should have considered that poison might not work on someone ranked as a divine stone warrior. Hearing this, Pecha glanced at him in confusion. Poison? Nagi quickly dismissed it. It's nothing. Instead, he changed the subject. Tell me more about him. If he's divine stone ranked, he must have some reputation. Pecha nodded and explained. That's right. Among divine stone ranked adventurers, he's known as an unrivaled close combat fighter. His emblem and even his very presence exude the aura of an unstoppable force. She continued. His dungeon clear records are exceptional. He's also infamous for picking fights with other adventurers, which has made him incredibly skilled at dealing with them. But that's not all, she added grimly. Especially his mastery of the massive greatsword, his control over it is beyond impressive. As she detailed his abilities, her expression darkened. He's so strong that he's rumored to be able to cleave an orc in half with a single swing. His speed and precision when taking down opponents, it's enough to make anyone wary of him. Hearing all this, Nagi let out a nervous sigh. At the very least, there's one small mercy: he isn't using his greatsword right now. Peicha nodded in agreement. That's true. Forcing a weak smile, Nagi tried to reassure himself. I was hoping to hear about some kind of weakness, but this is just hopeless. But Peicha's next words wiped the smile off his face. The bigger problem is, even if we somehow manage to take him down, time is already running out. At the same time, in a different scene, the hourglass continued to flow, its grains of sand steadily slipping away. Peicha suddenly reminded Nagi, we're running out of time. She looked up in frustration. Even if our destination is right in front of us, there's no way we can reach it in time. Raising her hands, still bound by the cursed chains, she let out a sigh. If only these cursed chains didn't exist, we could have split up and rushed to the top. Despite all their efforts to get this far, the obstacles remained overwhelming. Hearing this, Nagi muttered, cursed chains. Then, as if struck by a realization, his eyes lit up. That's it. We can't see or touch them, but we are still bound together. He recalled their movements and how they were affected by the chains. There's also the downside: if one of us falls, we all get dragged down with them. But then, he proposed a more optimistic theory. But what if we think about it differently? This could actually work in our favor. If one person reaches the summit, then we all reach the summit together. With that, a new strategy formed in his mind. There's a way to turn this disadvantage into an advantage. Maybe, just maybe, we can defeat the Divine Stone-ranked adventurer and save time simultaneously. Nagi fell silent for a moment, lost in thought. Even if this is just for show, I am still the leader right now. If I were a real captain, I would have to use every card at my disposal to the fullest. At this moment, he held countless cards in his hands, various tools, different skills, and the unique strengths of his team. Individually, none of them stood a chance. But if he combined their abilities, their resources, and every tool they had, could they turn the tide? He silently studied the cards in his possession, picking them up one by one, deep in thought. Can we change our fate? Without wasting another second, he snapped into action. First, Peicha, with your scouting abilities, can you map out our destination from this distance? She glanced up and responded confidently. At this range? That's easy. In fact, I can create a complete map. A spark of hope ignited in Nagi's heart. He smiled and urged, then, please, make it as quickly as possible. Without hesitation, Peicha got to work. With sharp focus and her signature quill in hand, she began sketching each intricate detail with precision. Stroke by stroke, the map took shape, bringing them one step closer to victory. In just a moment, a detailed map was completed. A 3D animated version of the map was also generated. Seeing this, Nagi was utterly astonished and deeply admired this extraordinary skill. He couldn't help but exclaim, the level of detail in this map exceeds my imagination. Then, he sincerely praised, you must be a top-tier inspector. Peicha responded nonchalantly, this is just basic work. However, she suddenly had a major question in mind. I've created the map for you. But what exactly do you plan to use it for? Nagi flashed a cunning smile and answered, we're going to use it to defeat a monster. Hearing this, Peicha was still puzzled. A monster? She asked. Nagi remained unfazed. Yes, a monster. Looking into the distance, he continued, this is not a battle between humans. It's a fight between humans and monsters. At this moment, there was no trace of fear in his expression. He turned to her and calmly explained, Peicha, when adventurers explore dungeons, they often encounter monsters far stronger than themselves. Then, he posed a question to her. Do you know how they manage to defeat such monsters? Peicha hesitated before replying. Maybe they rely on their experience to devise a strategy? Hearing this, Nagi immediately refuted. Wrong, you're mistaken. The real secret to adventurers defeating monsters stronger than themselves is using underhanded tactics. He then listed a series of methods, ambushes, exploiting weaknesses, and many more. Finally, he concluded, they win by fighting dirty. That's why, to take down this monster. Before finishing his sentence, Nagi's legs tensed, and in an instant, he leapt into the air. With a bold tone and sharp eyes, he declared, we must fight dirty. At that very moment, he successfully launched a massive arrow forward. Aiming straight for Durakan, the monster sensed something was off and, with remarkable reflexes, swiftly grabbed the arrow just as it was about to strike. Nagi spoke in a low voice. Even sneak attacks can work, even with crude arrows like these. But the real key lies in what's inside the arrow. At that moment, a strange white substance burst forth. Using a unique technique known as webweaver, the sticky threads wrapped tightly around Durakin, restricting his movements. With years of experience, Durakin quickly realized this was an adhesive web attack. Durakin looked ahead and saw that Nagi had landed right in front of him. With a sly grin, he spoke in a deep, commanding tone, facing me head on. Huh? Now this is getting interesting. His eyes gleamed menacingly as he glared at Nagi. Wasting no time, Nagi swiftly reached into his enchanted storage bag and decisively activated his item master technique. Without hesitation, he hurled numerous smoke mushrooms directly at Durakin. Before Durakin could react, the mushrooms exploded upon impact, releasing a storm of tiny dust particles that engulfed the entire area in a thick, hazy mist. Trapped within the dense smoke, Durakin struggled to regain visibility. Enraged, he cursed, covering the whole battlefield in smoke? What an annoying bastard. Suddenly, Desta stumbled out of the thick fog, coughing violently. At last, their group had managed to regroup. Nagi quickly approached, his expression filled with concern. Is everyone okay? He asked. Desta, trying to shake off the effects of the smoke, responded confidently. We managed to hold out. Beside him, Captain Nero added, this is nothing we can't handle. Hearing that, Nagi let out a small sigh of relief. Good to hear. Desta, can you summon more golems? Desta glanced down at his hand and replied. My index and middle fingers are still recovering. I just used my ring finger. But I can still use my pinky and thumb. That means I can summon 2 more golems. Seeing Desta's enthusiasm, Nagi praised. That should be more than enough. Then, with a firm voice, he turned and shouted, listen up, there's a way to turn this battle around. Meanwhile, Durakin had finally broken free from the web binding him. He raised a hand to shield his face from the dust. His fury evident. What a persistent nuisance, he bellowed. I've never heard of a swordsman fighting like this. Scanning his surroundings with suspicion, he muttered to himself. Did he escape with his allies to another ledge? But it was all meaningless resistance. Just then, Durakin instinctively glanced behind him, only to lock eyes with a familiar shadow. It was a trap. The figure continued murmuring, luring him deeper into the snare. The eerie whispering droned on, murmur, 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 drawing his full attention. Durakin clenched his teeth in frustration. Pathetic, trying to distract me with all this smoke. But it was already too late. The fish had taken the bait. With a sudden, furious roar, Durakin lunged forward, tearing through the smoke with explosive force. His body surged ahead with unstoppable momentum. Clenching his fist tightly, he unleashed a devastating punch, radiating immense power. As his strike landed, a brilliant white light burst forth, followed by a thunderous explosion. The sheer impact sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield, obliterating everything in an instant. Durakin laughed in satisfaction, clearly enjoying himself. But just a second later, that smile abruptly vanished, replaced by a bewildered and stunned expression. A goblin's arm reached toward him. What appeared before him wasn't Nagi, it was a goblin. Durakin stood frozen, unable to process what he was witnessing. His mind raced with confusion. A patched-up goblin? He questioned himself. Can goblins even talk? Before he could fully comprehend the situation, the goblin swiftly grabbed hold of him. Then, the realization struck him. This wasn't a golem. That strange-looking sack. It was making a sound. From inside the enchanted blue storage bag, a voice suddenly echoed, "You've been captured." Durakin had never anticipated this. But where were the others? Just as he voiced that question, his gaze flickered toward a rope hanging behind him. Dangling from the rope was a hand, gripping it tightly. Durakin instinctively muttered, "A rope," and along with it came a familiar sight, Nagi. He stood firm, gripping the rope with an icy, unwavering expression. Durakin, though still restrained, smirked arrogantly. "I see, so you planned to climb to the top while distracting me." Lifting his head, he took in the scene above him. Then, looking at Nagi's emotionless face, he sneered, "But you were careless, swordsman. Now that I've noticed, you won't be able to climb using that rope." Despite being restrained by the golem, Durakin exuded confidence. Nagi, however, remained completely indifferent. With a cold and direct response, he asked, "Are you sure about that?" Meanwhile, Desta stood with his mouth agape, completely shocked by what was unfolding. Seeing his reaction, Nagi quickly called out, "Are you ready yet? We've been spotted, we need to move fast." Desta furrowed his brows. replying with a serious tone. Just a little longer. He then glanced at his injured hand, observing his missing fingers. Muttering to himself, he said, "This is my first time controlling something from such a long distance, but don't worry." The grappling hook shot forward but hadn't latched onto anything yet. As it turned out, Desta had embedded a part of his own fingers into the hook, allowing him to control it remotely. Then, summoning his power, he conjured a flying golem from his fingertip. "I will make this work." With that declaration, the golem grasped the hook tightly, lifted it up, and slowly began descending toward a massive, terrifying dragon below. Gradually, its feet slowed down and safely touched the ground. The goblin used its strength to hook the grappling hook onto its shoulder and gave it a strong pull. Quick and nimble, it swiftly approached the dragon's head, which was sprawled out on the ground. Then, with a powerful leap, it changed its position mid-air. Esta suddenly shouted with determination, "Let's go!" As expected, up above, the golem had successfully embedded the hook into the dragon's body. At that critical moment, the golem, having reached its limit, swelled up and exploded with a loud bang, unleashing a devastating force. Durakan, witnessing everything unfold, looked shocked and furious. He shouted, "Impossible, that guy." Realization struck him. Things weren't as simple as he had assumed. Everything had been meticulously planned just to pin him down in one place. "This is dangerous," he muttered. His strong hands pressed firmly onto the golem's shoulders before he swiftly launched an attack to destroy it. At the same time, he shouted, "We need to get out of here immediately." Desta, who had unconsciously heard those words, smirked slyly and replied, "It won't be that easy." At that moment, the goblin seemed to gain an extra surge of strength, relentlessly and fiercely attacking Durakan. It turned out that everything had been orchestrated by the young master. But this was his most powerful move yet. Cornered, Durakan seethed with rage, grinding his teeth. Meanwhile, Nagi was still dangling from a rope, observing everything below. Coldly, he muttered, "This isn't a battle between humans. It's a battle between humans and monsters." On the other hand, the dragon, as if infused with an immense energy, suddenly rose up. Its massive body moved forward, leaving destruction in its wake. Nagi spoke again. "There are some monsters that can't be defeated instantly." The dragon gradually freed itself from all obstacles. If the goal was not to defeat the monster, then, its strength surged as it opened its mouth wide and lunged forward, as if trying to swallow Durakan whole. At that moment, its mouth stretched open to an impressive size, approximately 80 centimeters wide, revealing around 35 sharp, heavy teeth. It rampaged wildly, demolishing everything in its path, with Durakan being its primary target. Now trapped in this perilous situation, Durakan was filled with fury, gritting his teeth tightly. At the same time, the rope wrapped around the dragon suddenly went taut under a tremendous force. Without warning, it snapped against a massive rock, sending its long strands flying through the air like a loose braid. Swaying in the wind, Nagi slowly spoke, "Then there's no need to fight it, is there?" At that moment, he held onto the rope tightly with one hand, while the other, weighed down by the cursed chain, dragged lower. The chain extended, pulling all three of his companions upward along with him. With a triumphant smirk, Nagi suddenly shouted, "Run!" leaving Durakan behind amidst the collapsing ruins. The villain fell helplessly, unable to do anything but grind his teeth in frustration. The tide of battle had shifted in an instant. Meanwhile, at a mysterious and ancient floating castle in the sky, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed. A group of 4 raced forward. "Just a little more," one of them shouted. "We're almost at the dungeon's final point." Nero, panting heavily, gasped, "I can't even stand anymore." Nagi replied, "We're cutting it close, but we can do this." He continued, "But honestly, we owe a lot to Nero for this run." Recalling the moment when the rope was thrown, Nagi sighed, "If it had been me, I wouldn't have been able to throw that rope up to the top. That was at least 50 meters. He thought back to Nero's powerful arms and was amazed by her sheer strength. The way she executed the throw with such precision and decisiveness left him truly impressed. "That was seriously incredible," he admitted. Hearing the praise, Nero blushed and casually responded, "No big deal, meow." But deep down, she thought, "I was just showing off a little." Desta, rubbing his chin, sprinted past Nero and quipped, "Anyone strong enough could have done that, even an idiot." Grinning widely, Desta continued, "But no matter what anyone says, the true MVP of this dungeon run The one who took down that raging lunatic with sheer confidence is none other than me. Vendesta. He laughed and added, honestly, I might even be better than that so-called legendary ranked adventurer. Nero, watching him brag, sighed, you got beaten to a pulp the entire time. Pecha, still cheerful, turned to Nagi and said, everyone's spirits are really high. Behind them, Nero was still bickering with Desta. I contributed way more than you. Meow. Nagi smiled at Pecha. I suppose those two are experiencing their first true dungeon conquest. As he reflected on the adventure, he realized that the true joy of clearing a dungeon didn't come from any one person's exceptional skill, but from working together to achieve victory. Of course, he chuckled, I was just the guy carrying the supplies. Watching from the sidelines, Nagi turned to Pecha and said, come to think of it, Pecha, you played a huge role in this dungeon. Pausing for a moment, Pecha replied, I know that as a dungeon inspector, I have some special talents useful for reconnaissance. But, she hesitated, feeling uncertain, I thought it was just simple stuff. With a bright smile, Nagi responded, and yet, you managed to create an incredibly accurate map in no time. Thanks to her detailed mapping, they had been able to calculate their exact positions. Nagi recalled the map Pecha had drawn and remarked, I'm sure even a professional scout would be impressed by your skill. The two of them laughed, and Pecha asked, are you serious? She thought to herself, but honestly, compared to everything else we've done. She glanced at Nagi, who was running ahead, and muttered, coming up with and executing a strategy that quickly. That's way more impressive. Is he really just a porter? She wondered, how could someone like him be just a porter? Turning her attention to Desta, she asked, what's going to happen to that giant guy? A deep, resounding voice echoed in response. What do you think? He'll rot in prison for the crimes he's committed. Exactly, someone added. He should be banned from being an adventurer. Pecha fell silent for a moment, deep in thought. I'm not so sure. He did commit a serious crime. But the problem is, he's a divine rank adventurer. She recalled the laws governing high-ranking adventurers and continued. The higher an adventurer's rank, the more legal immunity they receive. Especially someone at the divine rank level. He's protected at a national level. Nero was stunned. No way. Pecha nodded. That's why it's very likely he'll get off with just a fine. Both Nero and Desta shouted in frustration. That's ridiculous. Desta clenched his teeth. Damn it, I don't care. He balled his fists and declared. If the law won't punish him, then I'll beat him to a pulp myself if I ever see him outside the dungeon. From behind, Nero crossed his arms and sighed. I already told you, you're the one who got beaten up. Meow. Nagi spoke in a low, serious tone. That's a dangerous idea. The four of them continued running along a path littered with corpses. Nagi surveyed the grim scene. What you saw from that lunatic, that was only a fraction of his true power. Look around, he said, his voice growing colder. These aren't just corpses. They're the bodies of Nonians, still gripping their weapons. Still in their positions, guarding the entrance to the fortress. From behind, Desta shouted, I could do that too. Nero added, we just never had the chance. Nagi, however, spoke even more gravely. That's not the important part. If you look closely at the wounds on these bodies, you'll see that they all died in a single strike. Nero widened his eyes in horror. Desta was also shocked by just one strike. Nagi spoke, an adventurer's talent lies in mastering weapons. Keep that in mind, when fighting against two opponents. The enemy did not use his greatsword or any special abilities. Esta was astonished. He relied solely on his physical strength and still fought exceptionally well. Desta gave a bitter smile. The difference in skill is too vast, and I've already given it my all. Then, his eyes suddenly lit up. Thinking back, it all made sense now. When they had lured that bastard in and dragged down the serpent dragon. Desta recalled the sword deeply embedded in the rock wall. He clenched his fists. If his sword was lodged in the monster's heart, then that boss must have been slain in a single strike. Nagi's eyes also gleamed as if he had just found the answer. So, because he fell along with the serpent dragon, he must have gripped the sword tightly and retrieved his greatsword from beneath the castle. Durakan firmly grasped his massive sword. Gazing at the castle, he let out a triumphant laugh. Perfect. Now, the real game begins. Suddenly, Nagi jolted in surprise as a crimson light flashed. He was startled to see cracks forming on the ground, accompanied by a resounding call. The rookies, run! Nagi shouted in panic. A deep red lava stream erupted from the fissures, cutting everyone off. Molten rock splattered dangerously close to Desta. He gasped as some of it scorched his skin. On the other side, Durakan swung his massive sword at the lava flow. Meanwhile, Nagi's bloodied hand clung desperately to the rock wall. 4 of them were now suspended from a single rope, gripping the sheer cliffside. Below them, the lava bubbled and churned violently. "Nagi," someone called out. "Is everyone all right?" he asked. Pecha struggled to respond. I'm fine," but when she looked down, her expression darkened. The other 2, they're badly injured. Especially Van, he's completely unconscious. Nagi clenched his teeth. Damn it. He surveyed his surroundings, realizing that the destruction caused by the previous attack was one thing, but Durakan was already closing the distance, leaping from rock to rock with incredible speed. "He's catching up," Nagi muttered. Durakan's glowing eyes locked onto them as he lunged forward. "What kind of monstrous strength is this?" Nagi gasped. If he hesitated for even a second, the enemy would close the gap. He glanced at the hourglass. Only 3 minutes remained. If they wanted to stop him, there was only one way. Nagi turned his back to the enemy and pulled off his shirt, revealing his well-defined shoulders and muscular frame. "I'm just a porter," he thought to himself. Nagi's body was perfectly sculpted, his muscles rippling with strength. He thought to himself, "I've carried countless loads, constantly training my body. If it's about lifting things, I have confidence. This time is no different." Clenching the chain wrapped around his wrist, Nagi tightened his grip. "I'm just carrying one more load." With determination, he clenched his fists and began climbing. The burden was heavier than usual, but he pushed forward, gripping the chain tightly and pulling. With sheer strength, he lifted Pecha and Nero upward. His resolve was unshakable. Nagi's sharp eyes gleamed with determination as he endured the weight. His bloodied hands gripped the rock wall tightly, pulling himself higher step by step. He climbed with incredible speed, his mind fixated on the dwindling time in the hourglass. Only a little remained. Suddenly, Durakan landed on solid ground. With a powerful swing of his sword, he charged toward the hourglass, which was nearing its end. At the same time, Nagi, battered and exhausted, reached the top. His hand grasped the ledge as he pulled himself onto solid ground. His eyes burned brightly as he glanced at the flowing lava below. On his back, he carried Desta, while Pecha supported Nero. Behind them, the hourglass released its final grains of sand. Durakan's silhouette surged forward from a floating rock, his sword aimed at the castle. His face was twisted with excitement as he lunged at them, closing the distance at an alarming speed. Just as the last sand fell, the castle's doors suddenly emitted a blinding golden light. The 4 of them, barely holding themselves together, stumbled forward. Before Nagi and Desta, a glowing blue stone floated in midair, the dungeon core. Nagi's voice was low and firm. "Destroying it will end this." Reaching into his backpack, he swiftly pulled out a sword and hurled it toward the floating stone. As the sword neared the core, a sudden explosion erupted. Durakan let out a triumphant laugh as he lunged forward. Startled, Nagi turned just in time to see the massive warrior's sword slicing through the air. Durakan struck Nagi's blade, sending it flying. With a victorious smirk, the towering figure landed before the dungeon core. A deep cracking sound echoed behind him. The core had begun to shatter. Then, a piercing scream rang out. "Ah!" The core behind Durakan exploded violently. Nagi gritted his teeth as the explosion sent all 4 of them reeling. Unexpectedly, a surge of lava erupted through the widening cracks. The molten rock shot skyward, triggering a volcanic eruption that sent rivers of fire cascading down toward the village below. A man fell to his knees, shouting loudly at the sight before him. His hands were clasped together, his face drenched in sweat. "Oh Lord!" he cried out as he watched the lava flow pour down onto the houses. "Have you abandoned us?" Suddenly, a monster lunged out from the molten lava. At the same time, another one emerged, followed by countless others, rising from the searing flow. They bared their fangs, eyes bulging with ferocity. One of them opened its mouth wide and let out a deafening roar. Nero collapsed at the sight of these monsters, reborn and growing even stronger from the lava. He dropped to his knees in helplessness. The dungeon monsters had resurrected, Pecha had returned. They surged forth without end. Then, a voice rang out, "This is a dungeon collapse." Durakan's hand was gripping Nagi's throat. "Magnificent, isn't it? The sight of a dungeon collapse." He lifted Nagi high into the air, laughing. "No matter how many times I see it, I never get tired of it." Nari, his face bruised and blood dripping from his lips, gasped. So this isn't the first time you've caused a collapse? Durakan grinned. That's right, small fry like you wouldn't understand. Looking around at the lava engulfing everything, he chuckled. When a dungeon collapses, it eventually regenerates into something even stronger. In other words, it transforms into a dungeon with even greater rewards. Naji's eyes gleamed with suspicion. And you did all this just for that? His voice grew tense. Do you not care at all about the villagers? Durakan clicked his tongue. Just for that? His grin widened. An adventurer only cares about one thing, getting better rewards. Still holding Nagi by the throat, he continued, why should I care about what happens to small fries like them? Nagi thought to himself, this was all too familiar. Adventurers were not heroes or saviors. As Durakan's grip tightened, Nagi reflected, they are selfish beings, driven entirely by personal gain. He felt nothing but contempt for adventurers like that. Then, suddenly, his eyes widened. He had witnessed the destruction that adventurers, those with both immense power and deep malice, could bring. The devastation was overwhelming, yet, in his gaze, there was something else. A bird, soaring through the sky. His focus shifted entirely to the bird. Rare though they may be, there are adventurers who spread their wings like birds, those with great strength and noble hearts. Willing to rise above, the bird flew swiftly toward the volcanic mountain. At the same time, a girl was biting into a steamed bun. She took a taste and was quite satisfied. But suddenly, her eyes sharpened. An adventurer with both strength and will. Without hesitation, she shot toward the lava. Her voice ringing out, target confirmed. She plunged downward, sword in hand, and unleashed a powerful strike with her leg, slashing through the monsters. I'll eliminate them before the chain reaction escalates. The monsters roared madly within the molten flow. Mystic swordswoman, blazing wave. A crimson wave of fire erupted from her sword, forcing the monsters to retreat. They scrambled back into the lava, their bodies still covered in the searing liquid. Weapons in hand, ready for battle. Durakan turned back in shock. Peicha, too, was just as stunned. The girl, having cut down the monsters, landed gracefully, her sword still in her grasp. With a firm voice, she declared, I want answers. I am Amessa Ferris, vice captain of the Twilight Wind. Explain what's happening here. Her sharp eyes bore into them. She was a Stone Star ranked adventurer. Amessa Ferris, vice captain of the Twilight Wind Guild. The volcanic lava erupted once more, scorching the remaining monsters. Nagi coughed violently, blood spilling from his mouth. Peicha rushed to his side. Are you alright, Nagi? He wiped his lips and nodded. I'm fine, but more importantly, his eyes gleamed red as he turned his gaze to the distance. Look over there. The dungeon collapsed, the molten lava was beginning to recede. The once broad streams were shrinking, and the cracks in the ground were closing. It's sealing itself. Durakan clicked his tongue in frustration as he watched. Even if this was just a low-tier dungeon collapse, to resolve it in a single strike? His gaze settled on Amessa, a glint of admiration flickering in his eyes. So, Amessa of the Twilight Wind, I thought your guild disbanded. What are you doing here? That place hasn't been active for 3 years. Amessa's expression darkened. Durka, from the Dawn Guild, she gripped her sword tightly. Given the state of things, there's no need for an explanation. Desta, another warrior, pointed his blade toward Durakan. A Stone Star ranked adventurer, there's no way you'd fail in a dungeon like this. You deliberately caused this dungeon collapse, didn't you? Durakan smirked. Oh, are you trying to pick a fight? He clenched his jaw. Amessa of the Twilight Wind. She was someone he had always wanted to face at least once. But this situation was far from ideal. He tightened his grip on his sword. That swordsman's trick earlier had drained more of my stamina than I anticipated. And then, there were orders from above. A strict directive. Avoid creating a large-scale incident. Durakan glanced at the crimson object in his hand. Besides, I've already achieved my original goal. His fingers curled tightly around the red, spherical stone. There's no need to fight any further. Durakan slung his sword over his shoulder and turned away. From behind, Amessa shouted, running away? Durakan chuckled and replied, running? He turned his head slightly. Don't get the wrong idea. That dungeon was a fractured abyss. Even for a Stone Star ranked adventurer. Victory depends on variables. There was no guarantee I'd win. Nero screamed. Liar. She continued, her voice trembling with fury. You didn't just avoid clearing the dungeon. You deliberately unleashed those monsters. Durakan smirked. Oh? And what exactly do you mean by that? His grin widened, eyes glinting with malice. Unfortunately, he continued, the dungeon contained curses that affected first-time intruders, causing them to lose their sense of friend and foe. Meaning, attacking you wasn't exactly intentional on my part. Hearing this, Nero trembled with rage. Durakan shrugged. If you don't believe me, you're free to investigate it yourself. Oh, wait, too bad. The dungeon's already gone, isn't it? His voice dripped with mockery. So, what now? Seems like a reasonable enough explanation for the guild to accept. Don't you think? Peicha clenched her fists tightly. Right, white-ranked adventurer? Durakan taunted, his tone playful. She gritted her teeth. Of course, it's nonsense, but she had seen it too many times in adventurer tribunals. The weight of a Stone Star-ranked adventurer's word carried more authority than the truth itself. No matter how many white-ranked or bronze-ranked adventurers testified, they could never overturn the words of a Stone Star. Peicha tightened both fists. Even speaking the truth wouldn't change a thing. And the worst part? Durakan knew it and used it to his advantage. With a cheerful smile, Durakan stretched. Well then, I guess we're done here. He waved casually. See you next time. Behind him, 4 adventurers clenched their fists in anger, their faces flushed with fury. Suddenly, Nagi let out a chuckle. At the very least, the dungeon collapse? He trailed off before he could finish his sentence. His body swayed, and he collapsed to the ground. Nagi, Peicha and Nero screamed in unison. Amessa turned back, her eyes narrowing. Nagi had lost consciousness. His body was battered with wounds, his hands stained with blood. Above them, a great bird spread its wings wide. Angel Un. Amessa turned to Agunnan. Bring him up here. Agunnan nodded. I can get us to the city in an instant. And with that, the stormy dungeon expedition came to an end. In the aftermath, a grandfather and grandson embraced each other joyfully. The villagers laughed and talked, welcoming the new day without a single casualty. Later, the Adventurers Guild arrived, issuing a formal apology and promising to prevent such incidents in the future. Of course, it was nothing more than empty words. Agunnan carried Nagi, Amessa, and Nero on his back. With Amessa's help, Nagi arrived at the Adventurers' City, Blem, the western city of adventurers. Deep within the city, in the guild's headquarters, the Twilight Wind's den, Nagi lay unconscious. As time passed, his eyes remained shut. Then, slowly, they fluttered open. Suddenly, his vision cleared, and he widened his eyes in alarm. He was lying on a makeshift bed. Struggling, he sat up and noticed Peicha asleep beside him. Where am I? At the sound of his voice, Peicha stirred and rubbed her eyes. She then called out loudly. He's awake. Inspector's awake. Her voice was filled with relief. She turned to Nagi with a bright smile. You're finally awake. You scared us half to death. You know? Around them, voices rose in excitement. Seriously, I thought you were a goner. Nagi, overwhelmed, raised his hands. Wait, where am I? He let out a small chuckle. The last thing I remember is that lunatic walking away. Peicha responded. This is the Twilight Wind Guild's headquarters. Nero chimed in. Yep, that super cool lady brought you here. Meow. Peicha added. She even called a priest from the church to heal you. Nagi was speechless. A priest? He muttered to himself before sighing. Well, I guess thanks to that. Aside from some fatigue, I don't feel any pain at all. He then glanced at the two. You both seem fine too. That's good. Desta let out a hearty laugh. Ha, this is nothing for top-tier adventurers. Nero grinned. Of course, my stamina is incredible. After all, she clenched her fists proudly. Desta, on the other hand, was on the verge of tears. This was my first adventure, under the name Vendesta. And it was truly unforgettable. His voice grew softer. Seeing how happy the villagers were when we stopped the dungeon collapse, it made me realize something. He recalled the joyful expressions of the villagers. Their heartfelt gratitude. I finally understand what it means to be a true adventurer. A young girl had given Desta a small flower, her eyes shining with innocence. Thank you for protecting us. For adventurers, a dungeon was merely a place of rewards and glory. But for the villagers, it was home. Both Desta and Nero lowered their heads in unison. I'm sorry, Nero said. Desta followed. I'm sorry for acting so arrogant. Looking at Nagi, Nero declared, I will become a great adventurer. Desta added, Captain, we saved a village today. Nagi smiled. That's truly wonderful. Deep down, he felt relieved. I'm glad we managed to protect the village. But as he clenched the emblem in his hand, his expression darkened. Now that it's over, I should tell them the truth. He fell into deep thought. The truth? That I'm not actually a gold-ranked adventurer. Nagi looked in one direction. In reality, he ranked below both of them, and he was merely a white-ranked porter. Would they still treat him the same way if they found out? Suddenly, Desta and Nero appeared in his thoughts. Of course not. Determined, Nagi spoke up. I have something to say. Desta and Nero looked at him in surprise. Please don't get angry, he added. Lying on the bed, Nagi confessed that he had been faking his status as an adventurer and acting as their leader. As expected, their reaction was cold. Nero, shocked, asked, "Is that so?" Then she continued, "Well, I guess we understand. There's no other way, is there?" The bond built on lies disappeared, and they returned to being adventurers and a porter. The two turned away. Nero said, "Next time, I'll make sure you carry our gear." With that, the two left the room. "We're heading out. Get some rest," she added as the door shut firmly behind them. Peicha then asked, "Nagi, did you really have to tell them the truth?" Nagi smiled and replied, "They will become great adventurers." He continued, "As a porter working in this city, I'll run into them again sooner or later. It's better they hear it from me than find out later." His words left Peicha stunned. She clenched her fists and said, "You're right, you're not an adventurer." As an inspector, she had met countless adventurers. Most of them only cared about their own interests. Unlike heroes or warriors, adventurers lived solely for their own benefit. But he was different. She recalled the times he had been injured, risking his life with just one goal, to protect the village. Without expecting anything in return, Peicha placed her hand on Nagi's. "That's why, Nagi, you're not an adventurer. She held his hand tightly. "You're a hero." Nagi sighed and thought to himself, "No, I'm really not." His mind drifted back to an earlier moment, while everyone was focused on Durakin and Amessa's conversation amidst the chaos. Nagi had seen something. Wait, what was that? A crack of light in the sky? His eyes widened in shock before a smile formed on his face. A golden chest, the dungeon clear reward, had appeared as the rift shattered. "Today is my lucky day." Nagi burst into laughter and lunged toward the chest. Ignoring Peicha and Nero in front of him, he used every last ounce of his strength to grab the reward before collapsing from exhaustion. Clutching his backpack tightly, he thought to himself, "I got all the rewards for myself, twice in a row. I'll check them later." Peicha looked at him helplessly. He looked strangely satisfied, she thought. But Peicha wasn't the only one who misunderstood Nagi that day. Nero and Desta also had their own interpretations. "So, you're saying the captain is actually just a porter?" Nero asked. Amessa chuckled. "You figured it out too. Huh, Nero?" Her eyes lit up. "Of course. It's obvious, isn't it?" Desta nodded enthusiastically. "Right, so, it's like this. He's pretending to be a low-ranked porter when in reality, he's a gold-ranked adventurer." Nero's excitement grew. "A hidden master? That's so cool." The two suddenly burst into laughter. "He probably thinks he tricked us," Nero said. "Does he really take us for fools?" What Nagi didn't realize was that they were even more foolish than he had imagined. From the top of the stairs, a voice called out, "Don't worry, we'll keep your secret so you can keep up the act. This will be our little secret." Another added, "To be fair, given how Nagi had fought during the conquest, it was hard to believe he was just a porter." Meanwhile, a chain of events had been set in motion, like a snowball rolling down a hill, slowly turning into an avalanche. Durakan's footsteps echoed on the stone floor as he made his way toward the staircase. He was heading to meet someone, a figure in a white cloak. "I've heard the news," the person said. "Someone interfered, didn't they?" Durakan sighed. "Unfortunately, yes. We ran into a strange swordsman, and got caught up in the twilight wind. At the very least, I accomplished our objective," he added. The cloaked figure responded. "You haven't forgotten, have you, Durakan? The duel with Vanesco?" Durakan remained silent. The Dawn Guild cannot turn a blind eye to those who disrupt the balance. The figure continued, "Whether it's a fake adventurer or the twilight wind, we must act." At the same time, a pair of golden high heels clicked against the wooden floor. Amessa was walking down the hall, deep in thought. "If what Peicha told me on the way here is true, then Nagi might be." She called out, "Peicha, it'll take some time before we reach the city." Amessa continued, "Can you tell me everything that happened?" Peicha hesitated. "Everything? Why were you there?" Amessa pressed. "How did he end up that injured? I want to hear the full truth." Peicha stammered. Well, that's? Amessa asked. Did you enter the ruptured dungeon without permission? Peicha broke into a cold sweat. Desta spoke up. Your party doesn't match the officially registered conquest team I checked before heading there. But don't worry, she continued. This is just a private conversation between us. I don't have the authority to hold you accountable, even if illegal actions were involved. Her sharp gaze lingered for a moment before she added, I just want to confirm one thing. I'm currently investigating the recent series of dungeon break incidents. During my investigation, I discovered a possible link to the Dawn Guild. And today, coincidentally, I happened to be there. Bentra, horrified, asked, Dungeon break incidents? I've heard whispers about them, but the Dawn Guild is involved? Amessa nodded. That's right. For now, it's just a hypothesis, but anything you can tell me would be helpful. Peicha took a deep breath. If that's the case, I understand. She crossed her arms. But you must keep Naji's illegal actions an absolute secret. Peicha continued. In fact, you should be praising him instead. She turned to Amessa and said, I'll explain everything. How we entered the dungeon and what happened inside the ruptured dungeon. Amessa fell into deep thought. A gold-ranked adventurer leading them was actually just a porter? Yet, he had nearly succeeded in conquering the dungeon. No, if it weren't for the Dawn Guild's interference, he would have succeeded in clearing it. A ruptured dungeon, something even seasoned adventurers avoided, was nearly cleared under the command of a mere porter. It was an unbelievable story. Amessa gripped the doorknob tightly. But what deserved the highest praise was his resolve. She opened the door and stepped into Nagi's room. The will to risk his life to prevent a dungeon break. Nagi looked up at her. Amessa, you were the one who saved us, weren't you? She didn't answer his question. Instead, she asked, Are you alright? Nagi smiled. Thanks to you, I'm fine. Amessa pointed at him. Good, then I'll get straight to the point. With the authority of Amessa Ferris, vice captain of the Twilight Wind, she declared, I order you to join my squad. Nagi grinned. Nope, I refuse. The Twilight Wind, symbolized by the emblem of an eagle, was once one of the most prestigious guilds in the Western City, or at least it used to be. However, after the guild leader went missing, the guild fell into decline. And just like its reputation, the eagle emblem had begun to crack. And now, after a long time, a meeting of the Twilight Wind Guild was taking place. The ancient building stood tall, its structure aged but dignified. At its peak, the emblem of an eagle was prominently displayed, symbolizing the once great guild. Inside, a woman sat with her arms crossed, her voice firm as she emphasized each word. I object. Taeyeon, sitting upright with an air of authority, placed one hand to the side. She confidently presented her argument. No matter how desperate the guild is, we can't just accept anyone. The focus shifted to a grand room illuminated by the warm glow of golden lamps. A large round table stood at the center, surrounded by renowned figures. Taeyeon continued, What does everyone else think? At that moment, Nice leaned back in his chair, a peculiar smirk forming on his lips. I agree. This was Amessa acting on her own. He said. Then, he added another accusation. Besides, isn't he just a porter pretending to be an adventurer? His words were immediately cut off by another voice. Calling him a mere porter and a fraud is going too far. Pororo, unable to tolerate such claims, voiced her own opinion. Do we really need to be so strict? I vote to recruit him. We're short on people anyway. Taeyeon's sharp gaze turned toward her. So you agree? That must mean you find him handsome, don't you? Hit right in the heart of her secret. Pororo's face turned red. No, I just focused on healing him. That's all, she protested. But then, as if unable to stop herself, she muttered out loud, Well, he does look good with his hair down. Taeyeon smirked. See? At that moment, Moon hurriedly spoke up to mediate. Enough arguing. It's pointless. Amessa is already gone. Hearing that, Taeyeon grew irritated. She turned to Moon and asked coldly, Whose side are you on? Then, Pororo also glared at her. Flustered, Moon shrank back, trembling, unable to form a coherent response. But what I meant was. Suddenly, the door swung open with a loud bang. A voice called out, No need to argue. It was none other than Amessa. She strode in and announced with unwavering certainty. We were rejected. The entire room fell silent. Nice, Moon, and Pororo all widened their eyes in shock. They spoke in unison. Rejected? Evelyn was no exception. Her face clearly showed her surprise, and her mouth hung open in shock. Meanwhile, in another setting, Sunlight streamed gently through the gaps in a window, casting a warm glow across the room. Nagi sat on the bed, rummaging through his bag in search of something. Finally, he pulled out a fabric ribbon. With practiced ease, he gathered his hair and skillfully tied it up. In just a short moment, he had created a small, playful tuft of hair. Done, he announced cheerfully. Peicha, standing in front of him, looked worried. You're already leaving? Wouldn't it be better to rest a little longer? Nagi quickly found an excuse to deflect her concern. I'm fine. Sitting around is too uncomfortable. Seeing his determination, Peicha didn't press the matter further. Instead, her round eyes reflected curiosity. I see, but why did you turn down the invitation to join the guild? There are a lot of benefits. Nagi lowered his head slightly, his fingers absent-mindedly brushing against the fabric of his bag. A faint smile crossed his lips as he answered calmly. Of course, I know joining a guild has its advantages, but getting too involved with too many people is just a headache. He voiced his thoughts and personal aspirations. I prefer things the way they are, simple and familiar. Hearing this, Peicha finally understood his reasoning. If that's what you want, I won't push you. Even so, a lingering concern remained in her heart. This is the second time you've run into the Dawn Guild. Wouldn't it be safer if you had a guild backing you up? Unlike her, Nagi seemed entirely carefree. Don't worry, I've already escaped from them twice without any problems. He grinned. Do you really think they care about a porter like me? Seeing how firm he was in his decision, Peicha sighed and relented. I hope you're right. With that, she gave a slight bow. Alright, I'm heading back to the guild. Nagi didn't forget to express his gratitude. Thanks for everything, Inspector. Peicha reached the door but suddenly turned back to look at him. She smiled. No, I should be thanking you. If you ever need anything, just come find me at the guild. Although he could clearly see her kindness, Nagi only pressed his lips together, not responding. Then, out of nowhere, he burst into laughter, looking absolutely delighted. With excitement, he hugged his oversized bag and spoke enthusiastically to no one in particular. Alright, let's check the rewards before heading out. I wonder what's inside. If it's something valuable, like a weapon, that'd be great. He pried open the bag and peeked inside. Glutton, are you in there? He called out. Hearing no response, he decisively dove headfirst into the bag, his legs kicking wildly outside. Nagi glanced around, searching for something. Where did that little rascal go? He muttered. The moment he spotted Klasteni, his mood brightened. Ah, there you are. Without hesitation, Nagi jumped over the edge of the pouch and went straight toward him. However, as soon as he got closer, he noticed something odd about Klasteni and immediately grew suspicious. Why didn't you come out when I called? And what's with that face? Klasteni scratched his head awkwardly. It's nothing, just forget about it. Nagi flashed a broad grin and got straight to the point. Have you checked the chest yet? What did we get? Klasteni waved his hands frantically. Nothing at all. A trace of doubt flickered across Nagi's face. Nothing? That sounds suspicious. Klasteni hurriedly insisted. There's nothing suspicious at all. Nagi stared at him intently, countless thoughts running through his mind. Then, without hesitation, he pushed Klasteni aside and reached for the chest with excitement. Move over. I'll check it myself. Klasteni tried desperately to stop him. No, wait. But it was too late. As soon as Nagi opened the chest, a golden light seeped out. His excitement grew. What kind of treasure could this be? However, the moment he peeked inside, his entire body froze, and his facial muscles stiffened. Inside the chest stood three beast-like creatures staring back at him. What are you guys? Nagi's tone was a mix of curiosity and confusion. Are they puppies, or just some newborn creatures? Despite his bewilderment, he didn't forget the most important question. Wait, why are they inside the chest? Nagi turned to Klasteni with an accusatory look. Glutton, explain, where's the real reward? Klasteni trembled, visibly flustered. His eyes welled up with tears as he stubbornly denied everything. I didn't do anything wrong. Trying to recall what had happened, Klasteni began explaining. I was just sorting out the bags like I always do. When I opened the chest to organize it, I found a pile of rock-like eggs inside. Then, out of nowhere, one of them cracked open, and a tiny little leg popped out. His mouth had hung open in shock at the time, watching as the rest of the eggs hatched. And then, these little guys just came out. Nagi fell into deep thought. If that was the case, then these must be monster eggs. They're not entirely worthless, he muttered. Sometimes, beast tamers will buy them. But as he observed the creatures more closely, he let out a sigh of resignation. Judging by their appearance, I doubt any tamer would want them. This was a problem. He had spent a fortune on dungeon supplies, hoping the reward would make up for it. Now, all he had were these mysterious creatures. Nagi frowned, clearly troubled by the complicated situation unfolding before him. What are we supposed to do with these things now? He muttered. Beside him, Klasteni suddenly put on a sorrowful expression and began spinning a tragic tale. His voice carried a deep sadness as he recounted the unfortunate fate of the beast creatures. They're so pitiful, he sniffled. I heard them say that their parents were enslaved by the serpent-scaled dragon and taken to the floating castle. Their parents sealed them inside monster eggs to save them. Hearing this, Nagi couldn't help but feel a slight sense of sympathy. That's some unnecessarily detailed backstory, he said, rubbing his chin, but I guess that explains why they were in there. Klasteni's eyes sparkled with anticipation, his lips forming a hopeful plea. Can I keep them? I promise to take good care of them. Nagi hesitated, his expression uncertain, but then, a mischievous glint flashed in his eyes. And he smirked. Well, they might be useful. Let's keep them for now. However, he quickly added a warning. Glutton, you're responsible for them, but if they tear up the bags or cause any trouble, I'll kick them out. Overjoyed, Klasteni leapt into the air, practically beaming. You guys heard that? He shouted excitedly. You're allowed to stay. But before he could finish his sentence, both of them froze. Dozens of glowing eyes gleamed in the darkness. At some point, the creatures had evolved into an entire pack. Cold sweat dripped down Nagi's face. He let out a loud yell before bolting out of the pouch like lightning. Wait, there are more than 3 of them? Without a shred of hesitation, he abandoned Klasteni to the swarm of beast creatures. Gasping for breath, he stared at the now violently writhing pouch, as if an intense battle was taking place inside. In the end, he slung the bag over his shoulder and left. Though a bit disappointed, he quickly regained his composure. The treasure from the crystal dungeon is a total bust, he muttered, but at least there's still the cave dungeon reward. I'll just settle for that. Meanwhile, in a distant town where houses were built closely together, Nagi made his way to the trade market. His voice boomed like a thunderclap. I'm selling all my magic stones and monster loot. In no time, a large pouch stuffed with gold coins was placed in front of him. His eyes sparkled, and the corners of his lips curled into a broad grin. Wow, it's been ages since I've had this much money in my hands. With a newfound excitement, he began carefully planning how to spend his massive earnings. First, I need to restock everything I used up. He eagerly made his way to the smoked mushroom supply shop. And finally, I can get my hands on those explosive mushrooms I couldn't buy before. After that, Nagi made a quick stop at a dessert shop, enthusiastically shouting his motto of stocking up on supplies. Next, he headed to the weapon repair shop to sharpen his weapons and buy arrows. Finally, he set aside 2 small bags of gold. When Van and Nero arrive, I'll give this gold to them, he murmured to himself, hugging his sack of supplies. Nagi left with excitement. Wow, everything's done, and I still have extra gold. Happily, he treated himself to a refreshing watermelon ice cream while planning his next moves. The morning sunlight bathed his face, highlighting his carefree expression. He skipped down the street, humming to himself, I should treat myself to a really good meal. From the rooftop of a tall building, a man silently observed Nagi. His eyes narrowed as he watched the small figure disappear into the distance. A slow, knowing smirk spread across his lips. So it's him, the man muttered, his face dark with menace. The one who's been causing trouble for our guild. Contempt flickered in his eyes. I thought it was just a rumor. But he really is a white rank. The rumors had been spreading lately some white rank adventurer had been throwing weaklings into jail. That wasn't impressive in itself. But then the man continued. They say he even landed a hit on Durakan. He glanced sideways at the shadow lurking nearby on the rooftop. What do you think, Nero? Does he seem strong? The figure remained quiet for a moment before speaking. It's happened twice now, so it's not a coincidence. A white rank can still be dangerous. Careful, Nero. But instead of caution, Nero's eyes gleamed with excitement. That just makes it more interesting. He pushed himself up with a casual ease, his stance relaxed but ready. Normally, I wouldn't waste my time on a white rank, he said, but if he really has a hidden ace up his sleeve. His fingers tightened around his weapon. In a single fluid motion, he spun it, creating a sharp gust of air that cut through the silence. Nero's lips curled into a confident smirk as he emphasized each word. I hope he doesn't disappoint. Then, without hesitation, he crouched low, planting his feet firmly against the rooftop tiles. And in an instant, he leapt forward. A dazzling burst of light streaked across the sky, radiating a terrifying power that shook everything in its path. Completely unaware of the impending danger, Nagi continued walking along the street, oblivious to the growing gust of wind approaching him like a hungry beast. The force neared his body, threatening to engulf him entirely. But just as it seemed inevitable, Nagi's eyes snapped open, glowing with a fierce, fiery red light. The ice cream stick in Nagi's hand was suddenly pierced by a flying object, splitting it in half. This unexpected event caused him to lose his balance. Before he could react, an unknown figure lunged at him. The attacker's movements created a burst of flames, carrying an incredible force. Fortunately, Nagi managed to dodge just in time. His expression turned bewildered as he shouted, "Who the hell are you?" The assailant smirked with satisfaction, despite intentionally releasing a menacing aura. As he finished speaking, he glanced at Nagi and sneered, "Yet you managed to react so quickly? Interesting. You're no ordinary carrier." His voice grew colder as he added, "But let's end this here." Nagi stood there, confused, unable to comprehend the situation. What is this guy even talking about, he thought. Before he could process it, another streak of light shot past him, throwing everything into chaos. The attacker lunged at Nagi with relentless strikes, his voice laced with provocation. "Come on, show me the skills you used against our group, you white-haired bastard." At this point, Nagi could only force a wry smile, still struggling to grasp what was happening. His eyes widened as he studied his opponent carefully, his gaze settling on the emblem on the man's chest. There was no doubt, this was a gold-ranked sorcerer. Despite the wild aggression in his opponent's eyes, the way he fought was calculated, almost like an assassin. Clenching his teeth, Nagi took a deep breath to steady himself. With such open hostility, there was no avoiding a fight. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sword. "I can't just stand here and do nothing." Seeing this, the attacker's excitement flared. "So, you're ready to get serious?" His eyes gleamed coldly, his pupils narrowing to sharp points. He taunted, "Let's see how your swordplay compares to Jeffnom's." Before he could finish speaking, his expression twisted in shock. His eyes locked onto the strange weapon in Nagi's hand. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. It was a special tool, gear exclusive to carriers. Suddenly, mushroom bombs detonated all around, their explosions deafening. A bright red fire engulfed the battlefield. Nagi grinned with satisfaction. Only a fool would face an adventurer head-on. Without wasting another second, he turned and accelerated away. The most important thing now was to escape. Nagi ran while shouting loudly, "Oh no, I'm going to die." He waved his hand, calling for help from the people around him. "Help, someone save me." Without hesitation, Nagi ran straight toward the Imperial guards. Panting as he shouted, "Guards, there's a robber, help me." The man looked at him in confusion. What's going on? Determined to survive, Nagi decided to play the tattletale. "That thug over there is pretending to be an adventurer. He tried to kill me." The guard seemed to recognize the person in question and asked to confirm. "You're from the Dawn Guild?" Hearing this, Nine sneered at Nagi with disdain before turning and running away. "What a disappointment," he muttered. Nagi's eyes were filled with confusion and doubt. "The Dawn Guild? Is this the retaliation that Peicha warned me about? But why? Why would they do this in the middle of the city?" The guard then lowered his head respectfully toward Nine. "My apologies, sir." However, he did not forget to probe further. "May I ask what this is about?" Nine turned to Nagi with a wicked smirk. "Oh, this?" Suddenly, he bent his knees, preparing to lunge. Without any warning, he dashed toward Nagi, muttering, "Just a little lesson in discipline." Caught off guard, Nagi cried out in pain as he was slammed hard against the wall behind him. The attack happened in front of everyone's eyes. Next, Nine shamelessly twisted the truth, framing Nagi in front of the crowd. "From what I've heard, this guy poisoned the food of our guild members and sabotaged our dungeon raid." His voice carried a disdainful edge as he continued. "Some lowlife in cheap gear dares to mess with the Dawn Guild? Because of him, I lost my share of the profits." He then glared at Nagi and threatened, "Everyone knows what happens when you cross the Dawn Guild." With false accusations thrown at him, Nagi refused to remain silent. He shouted in anger, "Lies!" Desperately, he tried to explain to the crowd, "I'm an adventurer, And it was your guild members who tried to kill me. Please, you have to believe me. However, their expressions were filled with hostility, as if they wanted to tear him apart. Feeling helpless, Nagi let out a bitter laugh. Haha, it's useless. Just as Peicha had warned, the Dawn Guild had significant influence. He clenched his fists, pressing them firmly against the ground. In this situation, no one will stand up for a low-ranked adventurer like me. Helping me gains them nothing. Deep inside, Nagi understood the harsh truth. Supporting the Dawn Guild was simply the smarter choice. As he was lost in thought, a voice from the crowd spoke up. Oh yeah, I heard about that. Soon, more voices joined in, criticizing Nagi. These low-ranked adventurers always try to deceive real adventurers. Yeah, lately, they've been acting like they're commanders or something. The guard, standing among the crowd, raised his voice to quell the commotion. I understand the situation now. He then turned to Nine and said, if that's the case, we'll leave it to you to handle as you see fit. A triumphant smirk spread across Nine's face. Well then, I appreciate it. They had no intention of letting him go. So, have you realized it yet? No one here is on your side. Even so, Nagi refused to surrender. Why are you going this far? You know the truth. Your guild was in the wrong. Nagi gritted his teeth, feeling as if he was about to lose his mind. Everything was already over, so why are you still seeking revenge? Yet, the man casually avoided the accusation, justifying himself with his own twisted reasoning. You're right, it wasn't your fault. He then scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. But honestly, who cares about the petty disputes of some low-ranking adventurers? Even if they were members of our guild, it wouldn't change anything. In the end, you harmed the Dawn Guild. He emphasized, and the Dawn Guild never lets even the smallest loss go unpunished. This is how we ensure that everyone who watches us remembers. The image of our guild will always be tied to suffering and tears. As he spoke, his excitement grew. With both hands, he pulled out two sharp scythes, gleaming like the weapons of a grim reaper, ready to claim Nagi's soul. Anyone who dares to harm the Dawn Guild must pay the price. He declared, and you're nothing more than a tool. A reminder to everyone of that truth. Do you think acting tough will give you a chance? He sneered. Don't worry, I won't kill you. But Nagi didn't care for his mercy. He regarded every word the man spoke with sheer contempt. Pointing to the left side of his chest, the man spoke in an icy tone. I carry the badge of the last fool I killed. A white rank insignia, it wasn't even worth showing off. Yet, his smirk widened, as if he had come up with an even bolder plan. That's why today, I'll mark you, so that whenever people see the scar on your face, like a flash of lightning, he lunged at Nagi, emphasizing every word. They'll remember what happened today. With his overwhelming advantage, it seemed inevitable that he would strike Nagi down, that his body would be buried here. But then, a sword appeared out of nowhere, blocking the attack. Nagi's eyes widened in shock at the sudden turn of events. He had believed, without a doubt, that no one would stand up for someone wearing low-rank gear. The clash of metal rang through the air, sharp and piercing. A warm light illuminated Nagi's face, stirring a flicker of emotion within him. I thought so, he murmured. Before him stood the strong, unwavering figure of a woman. At that moment, her powerful voice rang out, carrying an undeniable command. Lower your weapon. With piercing, cold eyes, Amessa stood firm in front of him. She spoke with absolute certainty. He belongs to the Twilight Gale Guild. Her conviction was unmistakable. From this moment on, she declared, any attack on Nagi will be considered an attack on us. He wandered aimlessly through the twilight, his footsteps heavy with exhaustion. Zero's voice suddenly rang in Nagi's ears. Stop right there. Are you okay? His tone carried a hint of mockery. This doesn't seem to be the outcome your guild was hoping for. Does it? Zero mimicked Ni's gesture of holding a blade, as if taunting him. Aside from words, there weren't many options left to confront him. Amessa hadn't been part of the plan. Ne idly played with his knife, casually commenting on the battle. Even if I had attacked her as well, it wouldn't have been an issue. But someone else. He stopped twirling the knife, gripping it tightly. In the end, disappointment was all he felt. This whole thing turned out to be such a letdown. I expected more from him. He recalled the cheap sword Nari had pulled out from his inventory and scoffed. A mere gear carrier, he did better than I anticipated. Yet, remembering how easily he had landed his attacks on Nagi, his disdain deepened. A gear carrier is just that, a nobody. After saying this, he shared his assessment with Zero. Everything ended too suddenly. But given how things turned out, he's probably too scared to do anything now. Zero smirked at Nee's arrogance and asked slyly, "Are you sure about that?" Nee maintained his confident smile. But blood had begun to trickle from a fresh cut on his face. Frowning, he wiped it away with his hand. Confused, when did this happen, Amessa? But Zero merely gave him an odd look and asked, "Nee, didn't you see it?" He advised him in a calm yet eerie tone. "Then take your time. Go over every step carefully." Zero's gaze turned strange as he studied Nee's expression. "Retrace your steps." He placed both hands over Nee's face, as if trying to help him recall the past moments. Like a film reel rewinding, Nee's memories flickered through his mind. From the very first moment he laid eyes on Nagi, to the moment he believed he had finished him off, the exact moment he thought everything had ended. He had assumed Nagi had completely given up. But Nagi had never given up. He had been waiting for his chance. Hidden within his sleeve was a small dagger. He had let it slip from his sleeve at just the right moment. Even in such a desperate situation, he had grasped his weapon tightly. He had taken advantage of Nee's gaze being fixated on his face. And with a swift motion, he had drawn a short blade from his sleeve. Nagi had hidden a weapon there, because no one in this world would ever side with a mere gear carrier. So he had to protect himself. In a single motion, he lunged, aiming his blade at Nee. Nee's weapon barely deflected the strike. But not completely. The blade had grazed his face. After reviewing the situation, Zero was furious. "How many times have I told you, Nee?" In response to the scolding, Nee simply ignored him, licking the blood off his fingers and chuckling. "Interesting." A twisted smile spread across his face. "Looks like I'll have to take back what I said. He's not as boring as I thought." Zero, acting like Nee's shadow, burst into laughter as well. "I'll have to deal with him myself next time." Meanwhile, Nagi slipped the dagger back into his sleeve. He reflected on his plan. He had prepared the hidden knife in case he couldn't draw his weapon from his inventory in time. But even that wasn't enough firepower to face a real adventurer. Deep down, he felt grateful. If Amessa hadn't been there to help me, I would have been in real danger. Yet, something still puzzled him. "Nida, who exactly is he?" Nagi questioned the true motive behind the attack. Would the Dawn Guild really send someone of that caliber just for revenge? Honestly, he sighed, I never want to cross paths with him or that guild ever again. Lost in thought, he suddenly felt a hand pat his shoulder. "Hey, what's with the deep thinking?" Knight teased him. "Don't tell me you're scared?" Stonung chimed in, joining the banter. "After what happened in the square, you must be traumatized." Huh? Nice then provided some insight into Nee's reputation. Even within the Dawn Guild, he's considered a tough opponent. Moon added, "He runs a gang of alley thugs. And even the city guards turn a blind eye to his actions." Moon scoffed in disdain. "We've heard about the Dawn Guild before, but I never thought they'd stoop this low, attacking someone in the middle of the city just over a grudge." Amessa, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. "Exactly. That's why I believe the dungeon is actually safer than the city. That's why I brought you here." She then revisited an old topic. "As I mentioned before, why don't you consider joining our guild? At least during this dungeon campaign?" Nagi hesitated, feeling a bit awkward. I just want to fulfill my role as a gear carrier. As usual. But I do appreciate it." Then, he finally voiced the more urgent concern on his mind. "By the way, does anyone else feel like it's getting colder? This is my first time seeing a high-level graveyard dungeon like this." The air around them was eerie, filled with countless gravestones. B-rank graveyard dungeon. Nice let out a loud laugh. "Are you scared?" He placed his hands on his hips confidently. "A dungeon like this? For us, it's just a stroll in the park." Nice and Moon began their teamwork, one tossing and the other catching. "Trust me, Nice is great," he said. "Just focus on picking up items while following behind me. If there's danger, hide behind me. Got it?" Woof. Nagi agreed with Nice, saying, "He's not wrong. Even though this is a B-rank dungeon, there are silver and gold rank adventurers here. And above all," he glanced at Amessa, "her rank is god tier." However, Nagi still had a lingering concern. Typically, in B-rank dungeons are higher. Forming a balanced team or arranging a lineup suited to the dungeon's characteristics is crucial. But this time, their entire party consisted of warriors. Given the nature of this dungeon, having at least one priest would have been better. A team leaning too heavily toward one role often struggles to adapt. Yet, before he could dwell on it further, Amessa shouted, "Stop! standing before a group of zombies. She remarked, "Looks like we're about to get a welcome party." The zombie soldiers, freshly risen and growling aggressively, charged at them. Amessa drew her sword, lowering her stance to gather momentum. Generously, she declared, "I'll clear the way." With a swing, she unleashed a fiery blade that decapitated a row of zombies in an instant. Amessa stood amidst blazing flames, swinging her sword at the approaching horde. Another slash swept through, wiping them out. She continued unleashing a variety of precise strikes, and the zombies fell like dominoes. Those not sliced apart were consumed by the flames, too terrified to react in time. Suddenly, a much larger zombie emerged from the midst of the fire. Its ferocious gaze locked onto Amessa as it let out an enraged roar. Nagi, watching from the sidelines, tensed up and broke into a sweat. Still, he couldn't help but praise her. "This is B rank for you. Barely started and we're already facing a mid-tier monster." Nice, cheered. "Come on, Afghanta." The massive zombie hurled a white boulder at her, aiming to crush her, but Amessa dodged swiftly. It lunged, swinging relentless blows, yet every attack missed. Seizing the opportunity, Amessa darted behind the creature. Her magical swordsmanship flared to life as flames gathered along her blade. Burning brightly, with a powerful leap, she struck before the zombie could react. Her fiery sword slashed through it, leaving its body covered in searing cuts. Engulfed in roaring flames, the creature screamed in agony. Amid the fire, a flower-like burst of energy appeared, her signature magical sword technique blooming brilliantly. The flower unfurled in full splendor, and with that final strike, the zombie was incinerated, reduced to ashes. It collapsed after Amessa's devastating blow. The onlookers, Nice, Nagi, and Moon, stood in awe, eyes wide as if watching a blockbuster film, munching on popcorn and wearing imaginary 3D glasses. They couldn't help but marvel. That's God-tier Amessa for you. Worrying about team composition was pointless after all. Nagi was in awe of Amessa's talent. "I've seen many adventurers," he said, "but I've never witnessed a skill as powerful as this." Among adventurers, skills are an essential quality, and each one varies greatly in ability. That's precisely why adventurers can stand against mighty monsters, especially those of God-tier rank, whose mastery of their skills surpasses all understanding. Noticing the group still gawking, Amessa snapped them out of it. "There's no time to hesitate," she urged, standing before the fallen monster. She pressed, "We need to move quickly before these things resurrect." Everyone hurriedly took off. This was the key difference between graveyard dungeons and others. While the monsters here were generally weaker than those in equivalent dungeons, the challenge lay in their relentless resurrection. No matter how many times you defeated them, the same monsters would rise again and pursue you endlessly. If your progress slowed, you risked being surrounded from both sides. When that happened, your chances of clearing the dungeon dropped significantly. That's why having a priest capable of permanently eliminating enemies, or using holy water sold by the church, was essential for a raiding party. The problem? Both options were exorbitantly expensive. The resurrected zombies were already catching up. Nice was the first to notice. Shouting, "The revived monsters are closing in." He began grumbling, "See? I told you we should have brought Pororo along. She's a demon in disguise. Always demanding gold for everything." Thinking of her greedy demeanor, Nice fumed. She even quoted an outrageous price to join this expedition, truly a demon masquerading as a priest. Then he turned to complain again. "Damn it, our guild is so broke we couldn't even afford someone like Pororo." And Moon agrees, she's terrible at healing anyway. Amessa turned back to rein them in. "Enough complaining," she said firmly, taking charge. "I'll handle the enemies ahead. Stone Moon, you block the ones coming from behind." Without hesitation, she sprang into action. "Got it," she said, then shifted her cold gaze to Nice. "Your turn." Nice. Her tone suggested she might kick him out. "Step back and watch, or cheer us on or something." Nagi, puzzled, asked, "Nice, aren't you going to fight?" Nice hesitated, flustered. After an awkward pause, he finally explained, Well, my weapon, my sword, is still in the meeting room. I forgot to bring it." Nagi was speechless. "You forgot your weapon?" Nice quickly defended himself. "We left in a hurry. So mistakes happen. What's the big deal?" Amessa and Moon overheard this and immediately criticized him. "This happens all the time," they said. "That guy's always forgetting something." Moon nodded in agreement. "Yeah, remember the time he showed up to a raid completely naked? I wish I could erase that memory." Nice was left dumbfounded, unable to respond as the atmosphere grew tense. Trying to lighten the mood, Nagi chuckled awkwardly and comforted Nice by rummaging through his bag. It's fine. I brought a ton of spare weapons. He pulled out a sword and asked, Nice, what kind of sword do you like? Nice reacted explosively, smacking his forehead against Nagi's and shouting, You idiot! Nagi fell to the ground, bewildered, and asked, What was that for? Nice, his face stern, declared, Listen up. I only fight with my sword, Elizabeth Robert. That's my oath as a knight. Nagi sat there silently, inwardly rolling his eyes. Is this guy drunk or something? Whatever. Forget it. As the two geniuses bickered, Moon's voice echoed from a distance, tinged with suspicion. Wait a sec. Something's off with the monsters chasing us. Moon had noticed something unusual about the zombies. There were fewer than expected. And they moved slower than normal. Amessa spotted it too. Under the zombies' feet were sharp spikes coated with sticky resin. Upon closer inspection, she realized they were caltrops. Calmly, Nagi chimed in, It's no big deal. They'll resurrect anyway, right? He explained. The real danger in this dungeon is getting surrounded by reviving monsters. Sure, we can kill them again, but it slows us down. It turned out Nagi had anticipated this and prepared accordingly. I scattered caltrops along the path as we moved, he said, scratching his head sheepishly. They're just crude tools, though, so they don't help much. Hearing this, both Amessa and Stone Moon agreed that Nagi was far more useful than Nice. Nice, overhearing, jumped up in protest. What?